Could I have your attention, please? We'll start out with the Environmental Justice Panel. We'll then go to the Drinking Water Purveyor Panel, then the Valley Water Management Company, and, well, that's, and also,
SIPA.
yeah, ZIPA. ZIPA?
SIPA, California
SIPA.
Independent Petroleum
Yeah,
Association.
SIPA. And then we'll do the Central Valley Salinity Coalition. And if you were here this morning, you heard that we're working on trying to get the Giants into the series. So.
Yeah, I bet you're just what they need to know.
Hey, I'm a Giants fan. They're from California. No, it's fun to tease you. When you
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Debbie Orrs. I'm with Community Water Center. I'm going to just start off with some of our comments. We definitely appreciate that staff took the time to respond to a lot of our comments. But however, we did notice many of the recommendations, and we provided about 19 specific recommendations within our comment letter that were not addressed or we feel were slightly mischaracterized, and we were trying to be as clear as possible. And so we would like to figure out, why some of this miscommunication happened. For example, earlier it was talked about in the response to comment section that the specifics on the 10-year compliance and at 10 years compliance, and we would like to see some sort of limit on exceptions, but 10 years is kind of what we'd like to see as an initial, and then there'd be a chance for renewal. But also moving on, a lot of our primary concern is community engagement, and in particular, making sure that communities can engage in an effective manner. Goal number 1 is providing all impacted communities have safe drinking water. When we asked about the communities that are currently treating, as staff mentioned earlier, that they could then, communities who are currently treating for their nitrate contaminated water, so they have an active source of nitrates, that they could participate in the management zone implementation process, or I assume the alternative compliance plans. That's really not sufficient to put the onus on communities to have to outreach and have their nitrate contamination issues addressed through CV salts. It really should be the dischargers through the management zones or the Path A compliance, the individual discharger compliance, that should be reaching out. And really, communities who are treating, oftentimes those are the easiest communities to realize that they have nitrates, because you can look at the Human Right to Water portal and see who was recently out of compliance or who is treating. So there really needs to be assurances that these communities will be included. We understand the prioritization. It is understandable and it is appropriate to be addressing those communities who currently have unsafe drinking water coming out of their taps, but everybody else who is paying at a very high cost should be addressed as well, and their contamination issues should also be addressed, likely later on, in the management zone implementation plan or the alternative compliance plans. We also, speaking of Path A compliance, coalitions can participate on behalf of their members under Path A, the individual compliance. We specifically asked for clarification on whether how a sum of capacity is determined, under what geographic scope, whether that would be throughout the entire coalition a sum of capacity is being determined, or if it'd be at the individual discharger level, which is the point of Path A. And instead that was not addressed or responded to in the response to comments, and that's something we're still very concerned about, because otherwise, if you allow a sum of capacity to be determined across the entire coalition, that's kind of a way around having to work with other dischargers like you would have to under management zones. And in general, management zones are really drawn or will likely to be drawn in a way that creates problems. And I know all of you here have heard us our concerns about that many times.
Let me ask a question here. So we have a management zone that's been identified, and there's a couple of different issues here. I think several issues you brought up. One of them is, what does that management zone look like, and who does it include? Let's go to another question, first of all, and that is who manages that zone. I think that's really the first question. And could you provide, so as I have understood this, it's going to be the folks within that zone are the people who are operating that management zone. And what role does the coalition play or not play with those people?
Okay, I'll take a first shot at this. And I'm glad you actually raised the issue. What you'll see in the late revision packet that went out is this question has come up, and in Appendix J, thank you. Appendix J, which is the nitrate, where we're trying to just put it in very simple terms and use several examples. We talk about the coalition. The assumption is that the coalition is a logical group to take on the leadership, the governance group, and to do the initial outreach to the members, and then try to make a determination within that coalition area if there are some areas that it makes sense to break up into management zones. And then there are other areas, you saw the map where you have green areas, red areas, and all that. If some of the other areas, maybe they have fewer dischargers and they can comply individually. Now, this is where drawing boundaries become very tricky. But for your first question, which isn't your question, but for your first question about what would they use for compliance, they don't get to use the whole coalition zone. They need to draw the boundary, and if they're within a boundary and that's proposed for a management zone, then that's the area that they can use in the upper zone, the domestic well area, that they could look at and see if there's assimilative capacity or not. Okay.
Upper or shallow, if it's the coalition
If
is
it's
complying
a,
on
if it's a management zone,
management, yes.
it's the upper zone, which is the area that draws for the domestic well use. If it's an individual, they decide they can comply individually. They have to look at their zone of contribution, and then it's the shallow zone, that upper 10%.
There's an
Now-
asterisk that says that coalitions can participate, though. If coalitions participate on behalf of their members, they'd be Path A. Not if they're choosing to participate as part of a management zone, but if they're choosing just for their own dischargers.
The coalition can make a decision that the entire coalition is going to utilize Path A, and then they'd be looking at the shallow zone, and they have to look at their area of contribution. Now, the question that Dr. Longley was asking is, how does that work? Who governs it? The way we had envisioned it, and they need to propose a governance structure to us that identifies how they are incorporating all the entities, including the communities and the domestic well users, in their development of their proposals, especially the early action plan, and then further the management zone plan and the management zone implementation plan.
Is there a public process for that?
Yes, that's the process where it would become, and here's, you can correct me, but this is the process where it would be, we would work as staff, and then we would be assuring that the community's engaged. We would be working with the group to help with their outreach, doing LIRIS notice, making sure they know who the other permittees are in the area. And then it would come back through each process. It would be posted on our list. There'd be a 30-day comment period for each section, and a determination made whether it needs to come before the board before it can move forward. Once it gets to the management zone implementation plan, since that's adopted into the permit as an enforceable order, that definitely does come before the board through the full public process.
Well, yes, and I'm glad to hear that. The default needs to be, it comes in front of the board.
Okay.
And so we need that, and I say that, that's what I mean is, there needs to be a public process inserted into this, definitely. And, you know, we can, I suspect as over time that there will be changes made to this, there is to everything. That as we find ways to make it work better. But to begin with, I think there needs to be that opportunity.
I did want to respond while we're right here on this topic about the community outreach. We'll have to double check the language because the language shouldn't say it's the community's responsibility to go find the management zone and get engaged. It should be whoever's governing the management zone that they're responsible for identifying all the wells that are impacted, community and domestic.
It doesn't specific, it says what it says, and I think I have the exact quote. They will be given a full opportunity to participate in the management zone approval process, which implies that the communities themselves will have to be the ones really taking the initiative to participate in the process, rather than as part of the early action plans, the dischargers will be finding, or the management zones will be finding those who are impacted, the communities that are impacted. This, by responding to us and saying they will have a full opportunity to participate in the management zone approval process, does not ensure that they will actually be provided or made whole by the fact that they're currently paying for nitrate contaminated water. And so I think that's the concern we have, and we think if you're not going to be providing people who have been paying for really high water due to contamination for years, then it's not meeting goal 1 of CV salts.
Okay.
And if that's not the case, then that's fine, and I just think it needs to be clarified.
Okay.
So, so you're responding not to the Basin Plan Amendment text that mandates that management zones find communities that are impacted. You're talking about the response to comments you think is phrased wrong.
We asked for clarification from the Basin Plan Amendment, and the response to comment what just made it even more concerning. So if staff has a better
But the response to comment says, where groundwater within the management zone boundary and groundwater impacted by those permittees within the management zone boundary is being used as a drinking water supply, and where those drinking water supplies are impacted by nitrates and exceed or are likely to exceed nitrate drinking water standards in the foreseeable future, management zone participants will ensure the provision of safe drinking water to all residents in the area adversely affected by those discharges of nitrates from those that are participating in the management zone. Another requirement is that the management zone ensure the provision of safe drinking water for the management zone through stakeholder coordination and cooperation. That's from our response to your comment number 4. I'm not sure what additional clarification you need.
So not to jump in, it was just a response to comment 9, I think is what she's referring to.
Yeah, but response to comment 4 also is a response to your comments. That process outlined in 4 is also applicable to 9. That's the actual Basin Plan Amendment
And
text.
you're reading that as applicable to already treating systems. That's
Absolutely.
our point. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
That was a very helpful dialogue. I cut you off for the dialogue, but so I'd like to do it in little bits as we go along.
I was actually done with my comments.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. I'll jump in. So I just have 3 kind of more overarching.
Can you ID yourself?
Oh yeah, Michael Claiborne. I'm with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and I'm here on behalf of both the Agua Coalition and Protectores del Agua Subterránea. So just 3 overarching points in our comment letter. We have kind of more legal comments on anti-degradation and Porter Cologne and other legal standards. We think those comments still stand, but I'm going to focus more on some kind of fundamental issues. So the first is, like we heard a lot this morning, the fact that there really isn't a comprehensive solution to identifying impacted domestic wells in the Central Valley. We think that this program really doesn't work in terms of a mitigation method unless you can actually identify who's impacted. And the Basin Plan amendments do not require any kind of comprehensive testing. They do say that testing may be required in certain instances, but we think it goes beyond that. Leadership Council works with residents and communities in 5 different counties. That's Kern County, Tulare County, Fresno County, Madera, and Merced. And just in those 5 counties, that's 450,000 people who rely on private wells, according to USDA data. So that's a substantial amount of people. If this program does not provide the means to identify people in a timely manner that are impacted and reliant on private wells, and I don't think right now it does, then you can't make the conclusion that we're allowing degradation, but we're mitigating, because that's not happening for this large subset of people. So the second point I want to make is, and just to clarify, we think that to actually identify people, you have to have a comprehensive testing program. The second point that we want to make is that we believe that a program that trades replacement water today for degradation tomorrow is not a sustainable program. So this is a program right now that does not have any enforceable limits on nitrate contamination and degradation, and doesn't have a timeline for either balance or restoration. Without those 2 things, the problem is going to keep getting worse. I mean, even without any additional farming, the problem is going to get worse, but we're exacerbating things. And the worse this problem gets, the more expensive it's going to be in the future. We don't see any guarantee that there's going to be the resources to provide replacement water long-term unless we get this under control. And then the third point I wanted to make was that there's a point throughout the both staff report and the response to comments that staff does not, or staff believes that it's been demonstrated that that most dischargers cannot comply with water quality objectives. We disagree with that characterization, and we think it's starting from a point of failure to just assume that dischargers cannot meet water quality objectives. Now, I know it's difficult, and it's going to take a time schedule, but I do think that dischargers can meet water quality objectives, and we have to act under that as a starting point, or we're not going to get water quality under control. And then I also had some points about, I guess, discrimination, and the point we wanted to make is really tied to, because there was a question earlier, it's really tied to the private well issue. We think if you're not identifying private wells that are impacted, that's going to fall mostly on communities of color, and that's something we have to address. Thanks.
Want me to start?
So, Michael, you noted you think folks can comply, and you admitted there's some time schedule. What is in your world and what is in your time frame that, I don't know how to ask this question. What time schedule are you thinking of?
Yeah, so that's not something that I think we've been really specific about. The law requires that it be as short as practicable. And I'm talking about compliance with water quality objectives, not restoration. Restoration is a much longer term thing. But we propose 10 years as an initial time schedule. That's currently what's in the basin plan for compliance with water quality objectives, is as short as practicable, not to exceed 10 years. We think you should stick with that. I understand that some dischargers may not be able to comply in that time period, and I think there's flexibility built in, but there should be some enforceable timeline to start.
If there are no more questions from the board for Mike, my
ahead.
name is Nathaniel Kane, and I am here on behalf of Environmental Law Foundation. And my comments are more on the legal standards that are applicable to these basin plan amendments. And I want to start with a comment that board member Constantino raised earlier this morning about the use of the words reasonable, practicable, and feasible. And I want to try to be as clear as possible about what our objections are to the use of those words in these amendments. And I think that there are a couple related issues that I'll try to disentangle here. First, in the response to comments, the response is that, or the characterization of our comment is that reasonable, feasible, and practicable should not be terms associated with aquifer restoration. And first of all, I want to be clear that we don't think it should be applicable to aquifer restoration or to bringing loads into balance, as that term is used in the in the order. Or in the amendments. And what I'm really concerned about is that we have a history in the Central Valley of applications of fertilizer that are much, much higher than plants can take up. That's the essential problem, and that the residue goes into the groundwater and becomes nitrate, and that's the fundamental problem. And the structure of Porter Cologne sets up the water quality objectives as the one fixed star that this board is in charge of going after. And to put a qualifier on that that course that that this board is supposed to be following towards the water quality objectives, we think it sets up this program to fail, as Mike said. To say that to reach water quality objectives only if they're reasonable, only if they're feasible, only if they're practicable, is to give this board discretion. And we believe that under Porter Cologne and under the non-point source policy, this board doesn't have that legal discretion. It has to set rules that will reach those water quality objectives. Key element 1 of the non-point source policy requires that this board set rules that have a high likelihood of success, and it provides no qualifier for whether that is reasonable, practicable, or feasible. And the reason that those words are so problematic for me is that they're undefined. And what is unreasonable? What is unpractical? What is unfeasible? Is it a 50% reduction in revenue? Is it a slight tweak to crop selection? Is it a major change in farming practice? We don't know. And when we're writing amendments like this that are going to be part of the law for a very long time, when we're talking about a 50-year restoration horizon, probably no one in this room is going to be there, and none of the board staff that have been, energetic in enforcing these programs are going to be there. Those undefined terms are going to be governing water regulation, and that's the problem that we have with it.
Mr. Palupa, I'd appreciate if you could give a response.
Yeah, I totally understand the reticence of going a little bit out on a limb to kind of see water quality objectives and basin plan compliance in a different sense than it has traditionally been. The regional board has been operating under the regime of we have to comply with MCLs at every single point in the aquifer, even if it's a tiny little drop of water that exceeds that threshold. That has been wholly and utterly unworkable in the groundwater context. Under that approach, if you measured that nitrate contamination in one tiny drop of water beneath a 1,000-acre ag field and found an exceedance of 10 at that drop of water, that would be a violation. We have, even within the surface water context, a variety of means to allow the board to have more discretion. So I don't think it's a fixed point. It rarely is a fixed point, especially in water quality. Whether it's mixing zones, whether it's secondary MCLs, which are identified as ranges, whether it's CTR criterion that can be changed with water effects ratios, whether it's site-specific conditions. There are many, many ways in which the board can have discretion to deal with something other than a very scorched earth approach to a single number that has to be met at every single point in the aquifer. What the board is doing here is doing something that is revolutionary in terms of how it's gauging compliance. I think that the board has a great deal of discretion, more discretion than I think we agree upon, in developing a water quality control plan to give themselves that level of discretion to continue to assess what is reasonable, what is feasible, what is practical in the context of determining compliance with water quality objectives. It's easy to say we're going to meet a nitrate standard of 10 every single place in the aquifer that's used as a drinking water supply, and then just call everybody who doesn't meet that a violator, somebody who is doing something illegal. But practically speaking, that's what we have been doing, and it's been wholly and utterly unworkable. We do not want to regulate to that standard. We want a little bit more discretion in determining how we want to regulate discharges into our sensitive aquifers. And I think that when you couple that strategy, a long-term strategy of restoration, with a strategy of also providing replacement drinking water for those vulnerable communities that are reliant on those aquifers, I think you come up with a package that complies with the applicable water code requirements for what the board needs to do when it develops basin plan amendments. It's tough. I think it's going to be tough to implement. I think this board is going to frequently be called upon to make judgment calls, and some of which I'm sure there will be disagreements about. But I think the board is vested with the authority to make those type of decisions.
You have a response, sir?
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to talk about this every point in time and space issue, because it's coming up a few times now in staff reports. And I've always thought it's kind of an interesting idea that maybe you don't have to, if you get it too narrow, you end up with kind of crazy results, like a drop of water in an aquifer. On the other hand, when you average across a subbasin, that's kind of the other end of a spectrum. I think that we can all agree, or we should all be able to agree, that if water ends up in somebody's well and it exceeds the water quality objective, regardless of the average across a subbasin, and it's caused by a discharge, that's a violation of water quality objectives, despite the whole one drop of water issue. So just wanted to address that.
And I think to respond, I agree with a lot of what you say, obviously. I agree that previous strategies have obviously not worked. And I would hate for this board to take away from this discussion that we're advocating for a continuation of current practices. We obviously are advocating for much stricter, much more forward-looking set of rules. But where I think we part company is the idea that meeting water quality objectives eventually and getting dischargers to a place where they are not causing or contributing to water quality exceedances eventually is optional. And where current ag practices, which have created this problem in the first place, where reducing that pollution is seen as unreasonable, I worry that argument taken to its extreme creates a vested right to pollute, because we are experiencing the legacy of many decades of over-application of fertilizer. And if we say that reducing below those levels is unreasonable, then essentially we've created a vested right. And we know from Water Code 13263, subdivision G, that there is no such thing as a vested right. So I agree. The present situation is not working. But I reiterate that this board has an obligation to meet water quality objectives, and I don't believe it has the discretion to place qualifiers on that obligation. Thank you.
Well, as a non-attorney, just an engineer. First of all, back to your averaging bit. If we take one case where when you do your averaging, whatever method you use, and you come up that the aquifer is polluted, it's above the MCL. Obviously, that's a priority aquifer there should be active work going on that to get that aquifer mitigated down to levels where it's within the MCL. And, you know, we talk about action levels that are 3/4 of the MCL, so we're talking 7.5 milligrams per liter. So if you find a well that's contaminated there, I think you'd expect to find wells that are contaminated there. However, if you do an averaging and you say, oh, this aquifer is fine, but you have a contaminated well, my own opinion is you can't walk away from that you've got to address that. And I don't know if the language in the basin plan does address that or not, so.
So under the pathway A, which I think is where the bulk of the contention is, early action plans are required if permittees are causing any public water supply or domestic well to exceed a nitrate water quality objective. So that's
Any well,
even
any well.
any well. So that is a component of the basin plan amendment.
Oh, good. Hi, institutional memory here. I'm neither an engineer nor an attorney. So my name's Jennifer Clary. I'm the water program manager.
That means you're smarter than most of us.
Well, at least I didn't spend all my money in college. My name's Jennifer Clary. I'm the water program manager for Clean Water Action. And I just want to start by recognizing Pam Creedon on her next to last day as executive officer and thank her for her leadership in bringing the issue of nitrates and groundwater to the table. And I just want to mention the first ILRP meeting, stakeholder meeting, I came to about 10 years ago. And the entire morning, and Adam might remember this as well, it would be like about 60 ag folks, and then Martha Guzman, Laurel Firestone, and I spent the whole morning grousing about having to comply with nitrate limits. And we went to lunch. She said, what's going on here? We're screwed. And then after lunch, Pam Creedon comes in and she says, I just want to let you know that nitrates in groundwater is a problem and ag is a contributor to the problem. And so nitrates are going to be part of this program. And that's all she said, and everyone shut up. It was amazing. So I want to say that whatever's happened since, that I will always admire her doing that. It was like a miracle. And if no one else noticed it, I definitely did. And I also want to acknowledge our ag associates that coming from that day to this, where they're agreeing to mitigate drinking water problems, is a big advance. And I want to share that I do appreciate that. I do want to note, though, that our organizations engaged in this really long and expensive and arduous process with two specific goals. First was to mitigate the impacts of nitrate on groundwater and take the burden off the people who are bearing the brunt of the cost of nitrate contamination through the cost of water, impacts to public health, security, community prosperity, but second, to protect and restore groundwater basins, because we are looking at the nitrate problem overwhelming us and overwhelming communities, and saying we have to find a way to stop this so we don't have more communities suffering. And that was the reason why we went into this. Now, I don't want to dwell on the process issues around CV salts. We've already talked to your consultant, and we hope that improvements are going to be made in future efforts. I just want to acknowledge that no one organization could have engaged in this process, at least in the NGO community. The three of us working together had a really hard time. And I wouldn't want to fault any group that chose not to participate. And at some of these hearings, I've heard that kind of blame game going on, and I just want to encourage you not to fall for that, because folks who are participating now are as fully have the full rights to have their comments reviewed and responded to. And I just want to be sure of that. So moving forward, we've had partial success with our first goal. We really appreciate your commitment to safe drinking water and the additional commitments we've heard today. I do want to note that even with this approval, we've been working on this for 10 years. We're going to wait more years to take care of the problem. So we want to say people are still being impacted. Until we see people getting permanent drinking water solutions, we're still going to be on the clock, and I'm still going to consider this a failure until I actually see people having clean drinking water in their homes. And the second goal is the one that we're most concerned about, and you've heard all of us talk about it. And I know that other people read the Basin Plan amendments one way, but when we look at this, all we see is managed degradation. that there isn't a strong commitment or a time commitment to restoring groundwater basins. And that means that we haven't achieved the full reason for participating. And that's problematic for us. And I mean, just looking at, think about the UC Davis nitrate report in 2012 that said 50% of the Tulare Lake Basin residents are impacted by nitrate contamination, either economically or directly through their tap. By 2050, 80% will be. And I think that should freak everyone out. We should all be trying to figure out how to bring that number down. And I think that that's something we'd like to do. And we think it's fixable. I mean, what we want are timelines. We want to be timely. We understand we have to be flexible about time, but what we need are commitments. Say, okay, if you can't, if in 10 years you don't meet water quality objectives, then you're going to have to go through alternative compliance plan, or you're going to have to get an exception. You're going to have to pay more, and you're going to have to provide us a timeline for what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Then you have to set, at some point, you have to have a timeline and a plan for basin restoration. Doesn't have to be right now, but we need an understanding about how you're going to arrive at that. And we don't have that security now in here. And then finally, in the phase one, when you're trying to provide everyone safe drinking water, that's also the time when you should be practicing things, trying out things like doing pilot projects of ways to restore the basin. So we want to see those early on. And so we also, again, hotspots are an issue. If you're averaging, you're going to have hotspots. And we understand that's in the alternative compliance requirements that's there, but we just want to ensure that we're going to take care of those hotspots, at least identify them. So we just want you to operate under the assumption that the aquifers can be rescued rather than just trying to make sure that they don't go downhill as quickly as they have been. And so I think that's all I have to say. Happy to answer any questions. Just want to acknowledge that everyone's worked really hard in this process and that we think that we can get to the finish line, but we don't think that the current document does it. Thank you.
Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do appreciate the tone and the diligence and the sort of thought that you guys have brought forward. And, you know, I'm sure we'll discuss and debate when the time comes here. But other than, I mean, there's you guys have been part of the process, and I think your presentations today reflect how well you've integrated into that process, and I just want to say I appreciate
Thank you.
everything I heard.
And if
Well,
I
I
could,
obviously appreciate your participation too, and sometimes when you haven't been at the meeting, I've heard you on the phone, so that's
I hope you didn't hear me snore, because sometimes that happens at those meetings.
No, but that's another way to, we have travel problems and a lot of other issues too. It adds to the expense of participation, and if you can participate on the phone, that's participation. So with that said,
I'd like to make a comment.
okay, go ahead and then I'll
Yeah,
finish.
I would just like to make the comment to the EJ group. I think you do an excellent job in representing the communities that you serve, the disadvantaged communities that don't have the voice, the Latino population that doesn't understand, because of the language barrier, all the impacts that they're feeling from the problems with the water. So while the board here has engaged and involved as the stakeholders, and you've been at the table, and as I said earlier, everybody's issues and things that they want to see done may not have all been done, but they've all been heard, and you're still here with us, talking to us, and there are still opportunities. But the most important part is you're representing an underserved population that does not have a voice, and I really commend you for being very strong in your positions and really fighting for those people in the communities that are impacted, and many of them might not even know it. So thank you very much.
So yes, and I join with Denise in that. I guess one of the things that really concerns me is I saw an effort start in eastern Tulare County some years ago to develop a consolidated system, if you will. And the roadblocks that has run into has been monumental. And I think maybe some of the legislation coming down the road is beginning to address those kinds of issues, but even with that legislation, I still see a lot of roadblocks. My own opinion, and you've heard it a lot of times before, I'm sure, is that we need larger systems to be able to get at the feasibility, get at the cost effectiveness. They do it elsewhere in the United States, particularly in the Midwest, and I think we have to find ways to do it too. When we work on just individual systems, sometimes 2 or 3, 4 connections, there is no way that they are going to be able to get safe water in a long period of time, if ever. Nitrate, maybe if we can clean it up, but we have an awful lot of wells that are contaminated with arsenic and other contaminants. And so we need a comprehensive solution that is affordable and can be put into place. And I think that half of the problem is roadblocks that are out there. But I'll get off my pulpit.
Well, I hope that you're now stating your support for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund currently in the governor's budget process, which is supported by both AG and EJ folks.
You're talking about 623?
Well, no longer it's in the governor's budget.
Oh, it's going, okay.
Just a little, if you have a legislator you could call, that's all.
Well, yes, and that certainly is an important step forward. It does not get rid of a lot of the roadblocks I'm talking about, though.
Nothing ever gets rid of a lot of roadblocks, but with the drinking water program under the state board, we've actually been able to start to address some of those. And I think that having a source of funding to help pay, for instance, for consolidations and create regional solutions is going to help us, because when you have to lurch from bond to bond to get money to plan and then get money to implement, it makes it that much more difficult. And then when you don't have funding for operations and maintenance, it becomes more difficult still, as Denise is a poster girl for that. I mean, total coliform for a year, that's ridiculous. And then the arsenic, of course.
No, I agree with you. You can get construction money oftentimes. It's the O&M that kills you in the end.
Yeah. Yes.
Any further comments? Any questions by board members? Thank you very much. Next panel is the Drinking Water Purveyor Panel. So that was just a short 20 minutes we did on that panel. I was being sarcastic. But nothing is short in this process. That's 12 years to come to today. That wasn't short. But it's the only way you get things done. Okay.
Honorable Board Chair Longley, Vice Chair Kadara, and members. My name is Alyssa Coleman, and I'm a senior engineer for the City of Sacramento Department of Utilities. I'm here on behalf of the Sacramento River Source Water Protection Program, sponsored by the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento, East Bay Mud, and the Sacramento County Department of Water Resources, protecting Sacramento River source water quality for over 2 million customers. Dr. Leah Orloff will be speaking for Contra Costa Water District and Zone 7. The Sacramento River Source Water Protection Program has provided comments and input on the development of the SNMP and proposed Basin Plan Amendment since 2013, including key issues and specific comments regarding the Basin Plan Amendment language related to drinking water secondary MCLs. We submitted written and oral comments in 2017 on the SNMP and written comments on this proposed Basin Plan Amendment. We greatly appreciate the Regional Board staff has revised the proposed Basin Plan language regarding the implementation of non-salinity SMCLs in the May 2018 version. In the interest of time today, this presentation is focused on the issues of highest concern for our program. Our comments today are based on the May 2018 Revised Basin Plan Amendment and do not include any potential changes considered today or tomorrow, so we reserve the right to further comment on any additional revisions. We incorporate by reference our previous comments on the Basin Plan Amendment and related documents. We support continued protection of the MUN beneficial use and believe that any changes to the Basin Plan should ensure its protection and be based on sound science related to the risk to the MUN beneficial use. MUN designated surface water supplies are treated by water suppliers for the total load of a constituent in the water supply based on analysis of the total concentration of a constituent. If total loading increases, then the water treatment must be increased to ensure removal and minimize the potential for breakthrough. If source water protection does not prevent increases in total loading, then community water systems may be required to implement additional treatment to provide the same level of protection for our customers. Our program is grateful for Regional Board regulatory management programs that have historically protected our MUN water supplies to minimize risk to our beneficial use. We also recognize and appreciate the efforts of the CV Salts participants to address difficult issues within the basin. We provide this input to help ensure that any changes to the Basin Plan continue to result in attainment of the highest water quality reasonable. We appreciate that the revised Basin Plan Amendment recognizes the value of protecting secondary MCL constituents as a key factor in providing a safe, reliable drinking water supply, which is a stated goal of the Salt and Nitrate Control Program. Managing constituents with secondary MCLs is a critical aspect of safe, reliable water as they affect a community water system's ability to treat water affordably, to meet standards, and ensure public confidence in the quality of the drinking water provided. The purpose of secondary MCLs is to protect the public from the aesthetic, taste, odor, color, foam, cosmetic, skin and tooth discoloration, and technical, scale, sedimentation, stain, and corrosivity impacts of the water. Secondary MCLs also serve as surrogates for potential impacts to human health, as some constituents that have primary health concern can have associated organoleptic effects, such as those associated with a chemical spill or algal blooms associated with toxins. Secondary MCL constituents can impact human health as well as welfare, with 8 of the 12 non-salinity SMCLs in Table 64449A having an associated human health threshold. We appreciate that the Basin Plan Amendment language affirms the continued applicability of other water quality objectives for these constituents related to the MUN protection and confirms that secondary MCL water quality objectives are based on total recoverable analytical method. We believe that nothing in this Basin Plan Amendment should allow for any changes to the SMCL water quality objectives, intentionally or unintentionally. This process is intended only for determining compliance with those objectives, which still remain as discrete numbers for Table 64449A and are based on total recoverable analysis. There should be no ability to use this process to revise any of the existing objectives or create any new site-specific objectives without complying with the statutory procedure for establishing water quality objectives. We believe that the May 2018 Revised Basin Plan Amendment language was a significant improvement over the March 2018 version regarding the non-salinity SMCLs, and we greatly appreciate staff's efforts to incorporate and address our concerns. Some concerns still remain from our previous comments, and we have reviewed the proposed revisions and have some additional requests on the May 2018 revised proposed Basin Plan Amendment regarding the secondary MCL policy. The May 2018 Revised Basin Plan Amendment language includes new language in Chapter 3 of the Basin Plan. Since the extent of this Basin Plan Amendment related to filtration of samples is solely focused on certain secondary MCLs, we request that there be a slight modification to the new text to revise MCLs to SMCLs by adding the S. The proposed addition of the term natural background concentration to the secondary MCL water quality objectives in Chapter 3 is significant, but there is no definition of this term. Existing Basin Plan references to this term are limited to the implementation in Chapter 4, and no consistent definition exists currently in the Basin Plan. Further, the new definition in the Basin Plan is a slightly different term and only applies to groundwater. We request that this basin plan amendment include the concept of a future public process for development of a definition for this term, since it will essentially be setting site-specific water quality objectives. The May 2018 revised basin plan.
Please go back to your previous slide.
Sure.
I'd like some discussion on this, whether or not this should be considered for late amendment to what we're considering today.
I'm still trying to struggle with the first one, just including the S for the SMCLs. I'd have to go back in the amendment and double check exactly where the sentence was to make sure that this would be appropriate. As far as the natural background concentrations, I'm not sure that that's necessarily needed within this basin plan amendment. That's basically a triennial review process. This has been included in the language, but it already exists within the basin plan under the implementation program that essentially says that we will not set our effluent limits or that are being used at a more conservative level than natural background. So there is a natural background term already in our basin plans. So I was a little confused with what you were saying by the fact that this is defining it for groundwater. It's not, we're not redefining a term that's already in the basin plan. Now, I understand wanting to figure out what natural background concentration is, and that's something that can be pursued as a separate basin plan amendment, and it can be proposed as part of the triennial review process.
That
Which
would
is-
be,
okay.
sorry.
Go ahead.
That would be great if it could be added into that process. I know we're past the time period of input on the draft work plan on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and the MCL?
That's on page,
You're talking about secondary MCLs not being appropriate.
top page 15.
I thought we'd already addressed that in the language that was presented to us earlier today.
This whole discussion is just about secondary MCLs. It's somewhat, I think, implied that it's addressing secondary MCLs, but
For those in the audience, we're on page 29 of the draft staff report. The
Sorry.
board's version is page 15. They've got a slightly different pagination.
sorry. It's within the discussion on the secondary MCL contaminant level policy, so it's just in that policy addressing secondary MCLs, so it's somewhat implied, it's just addressing the secondaries.
What would be the recommendation here?
I don't think it's needed, but I don't think it's really the board's pleasure.
Well, we're asking for your advice.
An S,
Page 15.
yeah, but I don't,
The existing language at the bottom already says MCLs.
whatever it is.
So it would be inconsistent with the existing language.
Okay, well, that's that, so it would make it inconsistent.
Yeah.
So it's not needed, and it would make it inconsistent with the language we're not changing.
Well, I'm hearing from staff that it's not needed unless other board members here believe differently. If it's certainly something you could bring up on the triennial review. It may take a deeper dive than just what we see on page 15.
May I add to the comment on that point, or did you want to move on?
I'm sorry?
May I add to our comment on that point, or would you like to move on? Could I add something to the discussion now on that?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, we appreciate it. So we have fold concerns on the use of the word or the term just MCLs there. We feel it's out of CEQA scoping and wasn't properly noticed. And I understand that from what was discussed that the intention of that sentence is to just be specific to SMCLs. So, you know, we'd be concerned that the intent may be misinterpreted many years from now to be used to have that lack of clarity on that. And the topic of primary MCLs besides nitrate was not included in this whole process. So we do feel that it would be important to make that clarification.
I apologize. This whole section is not just about secondary MCLs. It's about the incorporation of all the tables, primary and secondaries. So I misspoke that it was just secondaries. I'm sorry. I
I'm sorry,
apologize.
what did you just say?
I misspoke. It's not just it's not just dealing with secondaries. It's
Okay,
We're concluding that an MCL is an MCL.
that to be consistent with the last sentence of that section, which is already in the basin plan, we're not changing it or proposing to, that the first use of the MCL is appropriate, so it's consistent with the last sentence of the first paragraph there. So it says some MCLs may not be appropriate as an untreated surface water objective without filtration or consideration of site-specific factors, and to protect all beneficial uses, the Central Valley Water Board may apply limits more stringent than MCLs. So that's just continuation of the first sentence that we added is just feeds into the last sentence of that paragraph.
So what I'm hearing is that S is material.
It's not
It's not
intended to be an S there.
right. So adding the S is a material change.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're recommending we don't change it? Yes. There we go.
Yes, I'm recommending.
There we
no
go.
change.
Yeah, because I'm not sure I want another acronym to deal with and a category and
well,
because
that
I
acronym's
can't
already out
promise
there.
you that, but right now, not adding, this was not intended to be just a secondary MCL discussion.
The SMCL acronym's already out there elsewhere.
And Alyssa, what is your worry that if it's
This is very concerning, actually. I appreciate the opportunity to provide more input on this. Primary MCLs are for human health protection, and they have not been evaluated besides the topic of nitrates in this whole program. So to add in language that it was not part of the CEQA scoping, it was not evaluated, is to me seems to be a very big step. And I would suggest that if the purpose of the sentence was targeted on SMCLs, because it is consistent with the rest of the Basin Plan Amendment, with the approach on the non-salinity SMCLs, the group that is being proposed for the filtration and then total analysis, I would recommend consideration of moving that sentence to the next paragraph that's discussion of SMCLs and including the S on that. And I think that brings it all full circle, that stays within the scope of this program and also addresses the technical content, the desire for the clarification and the flexibility for the board in having that language in Chapter 3.
My comment is that I fail to see how it's outside of the scope of the CEQA scoping. I mean, these were, and frankly, the first sentence of that paragraph controls, at a minimum, unless there's an approved site-specific objective, surface water designated for use as domestic or municipal supply shall not contain concentrations of chemical constituents in excess of the maximum contaminant levels specified in the following provisions of Title 22, and it goes on. And then there's an acknowledgement, which is already in the basin plan, that the regional board acknowledges that specific treatment requirements are imposed by state and federal drinking water regulations on the consumption of surface waters under specific circumstances. We also, so the provision that's added in there, some MCLs may not be appropriate as untreated surface water objectives without filtration or consideration of site-specific factors. is not something that would be self-implementing and say, okay, we're throwing out the MCLs altogether. That has to be read in the context of that overall paragraph. It shouldn't be read in isolation as it's kind of described in isolation on this slide.
I have to concur as one board member. Certainly, other board members are free to do what they want. But unless somebody speaks up on this board, I'm prone to ask you to proceed. Any further comments you may have?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll agree with Dr. Longley.
The May 2018 revised Basin Plan Amendment includes language in Chapter 4 of the Basin Plan that presents a new process to implement the SMCL water quality objectives. We believe that this two-step process is a better strategy to ensure protection of the MUN beneficial use related to SMCL water quality objectives. We continue to have the concern that there needs to be an appropriate selection of pore filter size. The revised Basin Plan Amendment includes a first step to filter samples with a 1.5 micron pore filter. The revised Basin Plan Amendment indicates that selection of this pore size was based on the threshold for suspended solids in the TSS-TDS analysis. The revised Basin Plan Amendment also states that this approach is intended to approximate the level of treatment normally applied to raw surface water sources before such water can be distributed to the public as drinking water. We are unaware of any confirmed relationship between the presence of suspended solids and representation of treated drinking water. Standard Method 2540 states that suspended solids are typically represented by particles greater than 2 microns. We cannot see any justification for using a filter size less than the 2 microns, as indicated in the method. If the board intends to adopt an interpretation process based on the suspended particle threshold, we recommend that it be consistent with the cited method and the nominal pore size match 2 microns. In addition, the Basin Plan Amendment language references EPA methods 200.7 and 200.8 for analysis. Both of these methods can be utilized to report total or dissolved concentrations, so we believe that the Basin Plan language needs to be revised to be more specific to require total recoverable analysis, which is the intention of the Basin Plan Amendment, under all circumstances after the pre-filtration step. And we also continue to request that color and turbidity be removed from the filtered sample group of SMCL constituents and included in the unfiltered samples, and I'd be happy to share more on that. We also suggest some additional modifications to Appendix G. We appreciate the revisions that were made in response to our comments. And so we have a few additional that we recommend for the board's consideration today. The staff response to our comment number 16 indicates that the guidelines make it clear that the board intends to develop WDRs for secondary MCLs in a manner that avoids causing a significant adverse impact to MUN beneficial uses downstream of the discharge. And we request that this language be incorporated into the introductory paragraph of the document. And on bullets 5 and 7, we request that the bullets be clarified to include protection of MUN for current and future use, as shown. Bullet 8 includes consideration of community water system permit terms, and as such, this will involve the necessity of coordinating with the Division of Drinking Water in order to identify such systems and confirm the status of any waivers or special terms or conditions of operations. So we recommend the inclusion of DDW consultation on this bullet, as shown on the slide. The Sacramento River Source Water Protection Program appreciates the opportunities to provide stakeholder input, and we thank you for consideration of our requests and input today.
Is this something that you submitted earlier?
We submitted extensive comments, and then we also have submitted comments today that reflect the May version, and so this was our first opportunity. We did provide some clarification requests to board staff per their request at the last CV Salts Executive Committee meeting, and we appreciate the revisions that were made on some of those requests. And so the only new content today is related to any modifications that were in the May version, especially on the two-step process on the metals analysis.
Yes, these are new. We have not seen these comments before.
I think that It's very difficult for this board to sit here and consider new information without giving it extensive staff review.
Yeah, I think the
And
staff
comments
needs,
for others to comment on also.
yeah, staff needs some time to chew on this a little bit.
Yeah.
Give
so
us
this-
their response.
This may be more appropriate for the triennial review to
I
allow us
think,
to have time to.
I think it's worth responding to these, to the extent that we're able to. If we could back up a couple slides and go through them.
So if you're talking about total recoverable concentrations,
And so the suggestion that you're making, and I wish we had seen these even a little earlier. I mean, dropping these comments at the board meeting when we've had this process going on for months is poor form in my view. You've had these comments. You could have at least given it a couple days ago. I'm not, you said, you alluded to color and turbidity. You could go on about that. What is your comment on color and turbidity?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to note that we have been working very hard on our comments, and these specific comments, except for the color and turbidity, has been a continued comment throughout the process. That we've been working very hard to get to provide our review and to get them to the board staff as early as we could, which unfortunately the earliest we could provide them was, I think I provided them on, was at the 29th, I sent my presentation, but that was really the best that we were able to do with the time constraints. And thank you for the opportunity to talk more on the color, turbidity and color. The December 2017 Division of Drinking Water memo only addresses the appropriateness of an alternate analysis test for SMCL metal constituents only, not turbidity or color. These constituents serve as surrogates of overall water quality, represent risk from other measurable constituents, such as organic and inorganic matter and microbiological organisms, and have much more important correlations, most importantly as indicator of the presence of pathogens in a water supply and a driver of the type and amount of drinking water treatment provided. Turbidity represents a wide spectrum of particle sizes, and each particle can serve as a host for other constituents of concern to adhere to. Risk to the MUN beneficial use from turbidity is not specific to a particle size. Color is monitored in unfiltered water related to the MUN beneficial use and considered a critical indicator of potential water quality concerns.
You're simply reading your comments to us, and we responded to those, correct? So Dr. Longley, in the whole act, the whole chapter 4 here is addressing the Water Board's determination of compliance with secondary MCLs. Our basin plan contains specific objectives for color and turbidity. Nothing in this action is overriding or changing the board from looking at color and turbidity requirements in the basin plan separate. That this is what is contained here is how, for compliance solely with secondary MCLs, how compliance would be determined. It may be that the other sections of the basin plan are more stringent, and those would apply when we're writing our permits. So we responded to this. So I don't know if staff would recommend removing those terms at this point from the basin plan language.
And I would agree. I'm not sure what in our response was inadequate. There are water quality objectives for color and turbidity separate and apart from the SMCLs. I think the inclusion of total recoverable in these places is inconsistent with how the language was developed. And I'm not sure where the 2 micron filter suggestion comes from. The 1.5 was picked, as I believe, from a specific methodology.
and there's been quite a bit of discussion on that in the past.
That's right.
Which gets to my point that others have to weigh in on this also, and for this board to sit here and
So
not go through
Dr.
a
Long, I
couple
should say
day
the
hearing.
1.5, changing it from a dissolved analysis completely to now a filtered sample that's ran with a total analysis We chose a EPA-approved methodology that recommends a 1.5 micron. We have discussed this with the Division of Drinking Water, with Darren Polhemus
Right.
in particular, and he's in agreement with our suggested approach. That doesn't say that we can't reconsider others as appropriate, but he was not, and he said that he could support what we're proposing in this.
No,
basic plan.
what I'm saying is that this is a technical issue that may have merit, but there's a lot of other folks that have to weigh in on it besides this board, before this board can make a decision. And that's why I was saying earlier that this is, if the board is to approve this today, then this becomes part of a later revision. But it has to go through that kind of review by the public, other interested stakeholders before we can act on it. As a board member, I don't like to sit up here and in a void, in a closet, so to speak, make recommendations for changes until everybody else has a chance to weigh in.
And if we could move forward to the additional slides. So this is, again, inconsistent with how the water code coaches our responsibility. Our responsibility is to develop WDRs to protect beneficial uses, calling out secondary MCLs specifically with this added language. Again, it's significant adverse impact to MUN beneficial uses is not the language of the water code. And so I suggest that the board not adopt this language. When you're talking about beneficial uses, it's designated uses. Current and future uses is a terminology that hasn't been vetted. I don't know how we can see into the future, how far we can see into the future. Adding that type of terminology is awkward and kind of at odds with how the water code has our basin planning responsibility. So
I don't see how it strengthens it in any way.
I do not. I agree with that. And I think that other suggestions on the next slide are similar.
So, it gets back to what I said. I encourage you to continue to work with us, but in a way that we can run your concerns through the total process.
And I would add, with respect to bullet 8, I don't see any way that we would do an evaluation without consulting the downstream community water systems. Down gradient is a tougher term in this context. We'd probably engage with any community water system that could be potentially affected. Gradients can be kind of squirrely in certain areas, so we wouldn't want to limit it that way. And the Division of Drinking Water, as a related agency, is one that we would always engage with.
It's part of the family.
When we're evaluating those type of impacts.
Sorry.
May I?
Sure, go ahead.
We do appreciate the consideration of our final suggestions today, and did want to note that on the two-step method on the SMCL metals, we do appreciate the basin plan language does allow for parties to bring scientific information input for adjustment of that filtration size. So we do very much appreciate that opportunity in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Pass the keyboard here. I'm Leah Orloff. I'm with the Contra Costa Water District. I'm here today speaking on behalf of my own agency and also the Zone 7 Water Agency. I'll just get started as she puts this up. Both Zone 7 and Contra Costa are member agencies of the California Urban Water Agencies, CUA. There we go. And I mention that because for a long time we engaged in the CV salts process through CUA. and only recently have Zone 7 and Contra Costa been engaging on our own behalf. So we are water providers, urban water providers. Both of our agencies rely primarily on the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta for our water supply, which we serve to 750,000 people in Alameda and Contra Costa County. And I want to mention here that my agency, Contra Costa Water District, is not an exporter of water from the Delta. You heard staff discuss in response to Drinking Water Agency comments. You heard some discussion about agencies that moved water from one basin to another. That's not us. We have 4 intakes of our own in the Delta. Part of our service area is in the Delta. The remainder of it is adjacent to the Delta. So just wanted to get that out there. Since my agency and Zone 7 are drinking water suppliers, a core interest for both of us is protection of our source water quality. That's why we've engaged in CV Salts. That's why we're here today. I'll start by saying that we do support a comprehensive solution for Central Valley salinity issues. We commend Dr. Longley and the board for having undertaken this. We do, however, have some serious concerns about the certain provisions of the Basin Plan Amendment that's before you today. We're concerns that there are provisions in it that won't necessarily lead to Delta water quality degradation, but could do that. So we've been making comments about the need to protect source water quality for many years. We did make a set of detailed comments on the current basin plan, some of which you heard earlier. All of what we wrote was intended to secure protections for our Delta source water quality. And along with the comments that we made and which you saw, we submitted a set of recommended additions and amendments or edits to the language in the Basin Plan Amendment. I'm not going to go through those here in detail. However, my sense is that there will be another opportunity to do that. And instead, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our big picture concerns about water quality. And also to let you know that we, both Contra Costa and Zone 7, do stand ready to work with you in the future with the board and with dischargers on source water protection issues. So we do appreciate the commitment that we have heard that these Basin Plan amendments are intended to protect source water quality. Again, all of our comments have been on the necessity for adding language that provides firm assurances that that will happen. And we do understand that there's a balancing act here with the board's need for flexibility and our need to see firm assurances, but we think that that can be navigated. So every time we bring this up, we need firm assurances that all of the provisions will not allow for degradation of Delta water quality. We get back the answer that, well, that doesn't need to be in the Basin Plan, that you've already got those assurances. They come in the form of state and federal anti-degradation policies and the state water board's Delta water quality objectives. The thing is, though, that anti-degradation policies have not succeeded in preventing salinity increases in the Delta. That historically that's happened, it's still happening. The state board's water quality objectives do provide some protection, that's true. They set a ceiling beyond which Delta salinity cannot increase. but they do nothing to prevent the degradation of the water quality up to that ceiling, and that is our concern. So again, it's our belief that firm protections for delta water quality should be in the basin plan itself. I brought with me just one example of our comments to illustrate this point. That on page 43 of the amended Water Quality Control Plan, Section 4 provides that meeting performance-based limits constitutes compliance with the basin plan for participants in the P&O plan. So we have no problem with that language. What we would like to do is add a sentence to it that says, if monitoring shows that the discharge has caused degradation, then permit requirements would be reevaluated. Looking for that firm or firmer.
Let me just stop you for a moment.
Sure.
Excuse me. On our permits, first of all, this board is committed to source protection. No matter how difficult that may be, and certainly the upper parts of our basin are typically on federal land, and that causes us some issues. But don't we, on the normal MPDS permits, if that discharger is causing a degradation of the waters into which that discharger is discharging, I hate to use the word twice like that, don't we go back and reevaluate the permit?
Your question is that if the so it depends on the conditions of the permit.
Right.
But we set limits so that are consistent with whatever the board's decided on anti-degradation, whether they allow degradation or not.
Okay.
So that's a similar capacity issues and
Right.
things like that. And then we have them monitor, and if they are exceeding what the board has set as the limits for them to discharge or impact on the receiving water, then yes, the board goes back.
And on salinity, in some instances, we have allowed additional salinity degradation.
So in the Delta in particular, our biggest issues happen to be the POTWs for salts, and a lot of our studies on that have shown that they are not the most significant source of salts for the Delta, and so there has been some concerns because of their inability. I mean, here comes this reasonable and feasible. Where they were going to, if they could not find an alternative drinking water supply because it was their drinking water that was causing the impacts, them already to exceed the salt standards, that if they could not find an alternative, their only alternative would have been reverse osmosis, which was not feasible or practicable. So that's when the board looks at those types of things, and then they decide that yes, some degradation is warranted or needed, or in that case, we gave them a time schedule. So to come into compliance, which meant participating in CV salts.
So the comment, the request made to us to pledge to,
We do it anyway.
Yeah,
So
that's
a
what
lot
I'm-
of
that's what I'm
their
trying to get
added
at.
language is stuff
Yep.
we do. It's inherent in our process. It doesn't need to be articulated specifically in the basin plan.
I know.
It's something we're required to do. So-
If I may,
Just most dischargers or others just don't believe that we do it, but we do it with our permits all the time.
So what we're talking about in particular is language that refers to participants in the P&O plan for that track of compliance. And it says specifically that there's no need to show compliance with water quality objectives. What there is need to do is to meet the performance-based limits. And again, we don't have a problem with that, except that if they're meeting the performance-based limits and it turns out that they're causing degradation, we think that there ought to be another look taken.
So I agree with you, but the way the basin plan is structured, one, in the delta standards, we're not overriding any of the delta standards. We may give them time schedules, but but they'll be held to where they are unless they can demonstrate there's a need to increase. And that's a permitting process. So the performance base would be based on what they're doing now. So there's this assumption by the water purveyors in their comments that somehow people are just going to be able to just start discharging what they want, and there will be no more board control, and that's not at all what this says. It's not the way the text is written. It's not the way it's been discussed in all our meetings. It's the performance-based limit is consistent with where we've been right now with how we've been handling salts during the CV salts process, is that we're going to hold you to where you are now, and we've made some provisions for drought and conservation now. But the total loading, we're controlling the total loading. That's where the anti-degradation comes into play. But we're not just going to suddenly turn a blind eye to salts or nitrates through the actions that are before you.
And when this is adopted, we enter a new phase after it gets through the process. The emphasis through all of this is to reduce salt. And I have to echo what the executive officer just stated, that this is not a pass to pollute, if you will. As she stated, the performance standards are what we would be starting on, but over time, those people are going to be ratcheted down.
So yeah, and I mean, again, I think we're on the section for NPDES surface water discharges under the P&O study. Is that correct? Okay, so board members, that would be page 29 of your packet. And the question seems to be that they're calling out performance-based limits as the metric.
Yes.
But one of the other key components that we'd be imposing, and the basin plan language says, the Central Valley Water Board will continue to require implementation of reasonable, feasible, and practicable efforts to control levels of salt in discharges. Such efforts may include, but are not limited to, implementation of management practices that are designed to reduce salt in discharges, implementation of pollution prevention plans, watershed plans, and/or salt reduction plans that help to reduce salt loads in discharges to surface waters, and continued monitoring for salt in surface water as part of existing local watershed-based or regional monitoring programs in coordination with monitoring under the Salt and Nitrate Control Program. So there's a heck of a lot more than just a performance-based limit. And frankly, the requirements of the anti-degradation policy are that you continue to implement best practical treatment or control. And what this is requiring is the implementation of all practicable efforts to control salt here. So I don't think I actually think we are bolstering the requirements more so than we traditionally do, in addition to the requirements that we're already under to make sure that the discharge permits comply with state and federal anti-degradation
We don't
policies.
have those kind of controls out there today.
This is a package that looks at salts with a much closer microscope.
That's right, that's right. I guess as one board member, I don't really, you and I aren't reading the same thing there.
Yes, and again, I think perhaps we'll have another go-round about this at a later time. But thank you for that explanation.
Any questions, comments, board?
Well, we have periodic reviews. How frequent are the reviews for these dischargers? To take another look at it. I remember reading one of them where I had a RO feasibility and it was too expensive. And as the technology gets cheaper, we take another look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the comments has come up a number of times in a number of different contexts is that the board, when it's adopting a basin plan amendment, should say what best practicable treatment or control technology is. And I think we actually would prefer that the language implement practical control technologies, because what's practicable one day what's not practical one day may be practical a year from now, 2 years from now. New technologies come online. And so to the extent that this language allows the board to come back and NPDES permits renewed every 5 years, they come back in front of the board. Maybe somebody's invented the silver bullet in those 5 years, and we can put it in, we can install it, and it's cheaper and energy efficient and whatnot. So I think that leaves that discretion to the board to ask them to do that. If cost-effective things come online, that can be handled in a reasonable manner.
So I certainly appreciate the comments and the details in the comments, and it tells me you're paying attention. And there's a theme here, and we'll see what the next panel has to say. But on the EJ side, and you guys, it's trust, right? It's worry that something could happen, right? And so we want to get as much written down as possible, and I don't want to say tie the hands of the regulators, but this is the opportunity to tell the regulators what they can do. And I get it. That's the process, because once this is written and sort of out there, then whatever discretion is left to the regulator, that's always the worry of both sides. I totally understand that, and that is the process that we're going through. Let's finish the day, and then we can have the discussion as to where the board thinks, how much trust is necessarily given to staff, or how much more needs to be tightened down. But that's sort of the theme I'm getting is everybody wants that last little noose around the pinky toe, right? And we'll see where it goes. But I definitely hear where you're coming from. Thank you.
Well, the board is obligated to protect water quality, and if we don't, we hear it from the governor and from the legislature and from the public, and those are the kind of folks we don't want to hear from. We want to.
That's not true.
We want to have. We don't want people doubting our trust. So that's something we work on. Not all think maybe that we do what we should do, but we work with a very diverse population. But at the end of the day, I think we put a lot of effort into ensuring that we are protecting water quality. Any other comments? Do you have some further comments?
Well, I'll say that we certainly appreciate all the efforts to maintain water quality. And I agree with your characterization. And it's not a matter of trust or distrust in the intentions of the drafters of this, of the amendment. It's a question of, going forward. As I said before, we appreciate the need for flexibility for the board. We also want some assurances for ourselves that our water quality will not degrade, and we think that the balance is shifted a little bit to one side too much. I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and we look forward to further engagement.
Thank you. Bob and Melissa. You can sit down and make it if you want to.
West, yes. How do I push buttons? Good afternoon, Chair Longley and board members. My name is Melissa Thorm. I'm here today for Valley Water Management Company. And first, I really want to recognize all the numerous hours and months and years that staff has put into this. It's a human's job to do this work and to come into work and have to hear everybody saying, oh, I want this one more thing, which is why I'm here about that one more thing. So we have been involved with CV salts since 2015. The oil industry was kind of a latecomer to CV salts. I had been involved earlier personally through POTW things, but today I'm wearing the oil field hat. So we wanted to thank you for the changes that were made, including the boron limits being removed from the Tulare Lake Basin Plan and inserting boron into the exceptions, but we do still have a concern about permitting in the interim when you're trying to get a boron exception. And we believe that the issues are the same that dischargers have had with salinity, and what we're going to request is an outgrowth of the comments that were made during the basin planning process. So our proposed solution is to incorporate boron into the definition of salinity, and we provided an email back in September 30th of 2016, and I have copies of these. I provided these copies to Jeannie before, but she said that I need to bring them to the hearing to make sure they get into the record. But the approach is consistent with what this board has done before in this lower San Joaquin River salt and boron TMDL, and also has been done by other regional boards, which Region 4 did a Cayugas chloride and boron TMDL. So we proposed to incorporate boron into the salinity management program in addition to the exceptions process, but only one of those alternatives was included in the analysis. So we also provided Jeannie with a stack of studies, including the 2016 UC Davis study that suggests that high salinity water or salinity in the water can affect how plants take up boron. So it's kind of intertwined, and you need to know how much salinity is in and how much boron is in. So to me, it just makes sense that you just incorporate boron into the P&O study and have them go together, because I think they are intertwined, and both plants don't want a whole lot of salt, they don't want a whole lot of boron. And I think the solution is the same as the regulated brine line, that you're going to have to RO this water to get boron out and maybe do ion exchange on top of that. And we all want water that's acceptable to crops, both in terms of salinity and boron, but it might be difficult even for farmers and other dischargers besides oil to meet the boron coming off the discharges. And so this proposal avoids any inherent problems that we might have on permitting and works towards a consolidated solution through the prioritization and optimization study. The change is very simple, just adding the word boron into the definition of salinity. Most recently, fixed dissolved solids were added in. There has not been an ion-specific analysis done in the environmental documents, so we didn't look at chloride specifically or sodium specifically or TDS or any of those things specifically. So if you put boron into the definition of salinity, the analysis doesn't change on the environmental or anti-degradation analysis. It's all the same. So that is our request, and then I will turn it over to Bob, and thank you again.
So Pamela, could you comment on this request? Patrick?
So it is just a couple words being changed in the basin plan. I think it could have very significant ramifications for the regulatory program. I certainly see where Melissa's going with this. I think that we've got 12 years worth of studies that have not been teasing out boron specifically as a constituent. Boron is regulated differently. It does have different aspects that does impact plants in a different manner. Many in the ag community, while they're struggling with salt, have very different opinions as to what boron will do. Boron can have adverse effects on crops. I think in concept, the idea of regulating boron in a similar manner to salt makes sense. This issue was not fully vetted through the years of CV salts in the same manner that salt was. I think adding it in at this late stage, first of all, I don't think it could be done today or tomorrow. And I think adding it in would take a long, protracted effort to take a hard look at all the science that's out there, to vet this in a similar manner as the other scientific conclusions were vetted in front of the peer review panel, to engage with other agricultural experts to see what the ramifications could be. In short, I support this in concept, but I think practically speaking, this would set the CV salts process back a while, and that this is a matter best considered under the triennial review, potentially at a later date for a
During
later
the staff
revision.
during the staff presentation this morning, we spoke about boron, and wasn't there a commitment from staff that you were going to give boron a hard look?
The commitment was that we could include it in the triennial review, and there could be further discussion as the P&O study went forward, but there was not a recommendation to include it as a specific constituent of the P&O study, or to try to develop numeric values for it, or do any of the other things that have been the foundation of the framework for the salt and nitrate control program. Specifically, as Patrick was alluding to, the fact that we don't have the studies that we've had over the last 12 years, where we were looking at TDS and we were looking at EC, and we did white papers where we did look at chloride, sulfate, and sodium and their impacts on different beneficial uses, and we had not done the same for boron. So, and I hate bringing in other basin plan amendments, but when we were doing the Lower San Joaquin River amendment, one of the comments that had come up was that it would be nice to have something like the Hoffman model that determined the salinity levels that were protective of crops for boron, but we don't have that yet. So we don't really have something that is the same specifically for ECTDS that we can just across the board apply to boron.
Yes, Melissa?
Those documents that I gave you, there are those tables, exactly like the Hoffman tables, that have the different crops and what levels they're allowed to have. So that's in those salinity studies. Plus, a lot of those documents include boron in the definition of TDS. So you're already regulating TDS. If it's a constituent of TDS, it's kind of already in the mix already. So it's just making it more clear. So that was one of our.
So these were the ones, when were they handed?
I gave them to Jeannie at the last CV Salts meeting.
Last
and
Thursday.
she said
So
that.
last Thursday?
Yeah,
I
and
was
she
standing
said
right
that I
there
need
when
to
she
bring
did.
them to.
And this was after the close of the comment period, right?
Yes, because that was a response to the comments, was that we need more information about this. And so in response to the response to comments,
Yeah.
we give that information. So
I don't think this is part of the record, unless the board feels differently.
No, not at this point, because who knows about those studies? They have to be looked at, Melissa, closely first, and we'd have to get them vetted by,
yeah, I don't know that the
by our
Grattan study
experts.
is already one of the documents that the
Yeah.
2006 UC Davis study, I don't know that was already part of
You
the
know,
record.
Dr.
or not.
Long, in fairness to the CV SALT stakeholder effort, the agricultural community was on board with making revisions to just make them receiving water limits for boron and letting the board set the specific boron levels in the discharges instead of setting a specific effluent limits. But there hasn't been any discussion with the agricultural community
No.
on making this a part of the P&O study. And boron is what will really affect ag more than anything. And I think it would be unfair for the board to make this change without agriculture having a opportunity to weigh into this completely.
I certainly agree with that, but as you begin to regulate boron, you have to understand it's how you mitigate it, and we're not there yet. With boron, it's particularly difficult to mitigate. So, as one board member, I'm not interested at this point in time in making any revision based upon boron. I think it's something we need to. Must have been in my dream. I thought I've been dreaming about this meeting for a week. So I saw you stand up and we'll do it. No, but I think we need to begin to move on boron. It's not going to happen overnight. but we need to vet those studies. We need to possibly have other work done by UC Davis or whoever. There are some other issues on boron. I'm interested in the treatment angle because certainly it's a valuable product if you can get it out of the water. Any further discussion on that?
I agree, no action at this point, but I think it's worthy of study.
Thank you, Mr. Gore.
Good afternoon, Dr. Longley and panel members. Robert Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of the California Independent Petroleum Association. A few words before our ag colleagues join us. SIPA thanks Executive Directors Pamela Creedon and Patrick Palupa, as well as Program Manager Jeannie Chilcott, and also thanks the CV Salt Salinity Coalition, in particular our agricultural friends, for their patience as we joined the coalition in 2017, and we appreciate their forbearance as well as their diligence. Tess in particular done in closing out CV Salt, so she was nothing short of amazing. 12 years ago, I met Pamela Creedon. 12 years ago, this is something I have to share because it's happening this week. 12 years ago, our youngest daughter was 12. Today, she starts at the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Our son was 9. This week, he started at Vallejo Police. So as you can see, 12 years time passes for everything, including this amazing regulatory package. SIPAs, 450 members are mostly medium and small employers. They live and work in the San Joaquin and Central Valleys. They work hard daily producing California energy and good paying careers. Water quality management is a byproduct of California oil production. For every barrel of oil, there are about 15 barrels of water produced, or about 130 billion gallons annually. The vast majority of this water is recycled directly for further production. About 8% in the Kern County area is blended and treated for agricultural use and irrigation under state-approved permits. This recycling has taken place for 35 years without any incident. Kern County oil and gas producers provide about 43,000 acre-feet annually for crop irrigation. Moving ahead with SIPA's commitment to CV salts. SIPA members and the Water Board recently collaborated over the course of several months to complete the general orders for WDRs for oil field discharges to land. We hope these general orders are incorporated into this process as the Irrigated Lands Program general orders are now. We will add to existing data and research. Data harvesting must be efficient and effective. We are pleased with the addition of USGS Regional Monitoring Program, the Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, and the Department of Conservation to our resources for this endeavor. We will work with staff and agencies to continue to provide our new hydrogeologic experience and extensive knowledge. Thank you for including in-kind technical support to the P&O study. And we also appreciate the consideration by the lead entity of proportional contribution of salts and other factors as determined appropriate as a gauge for participation. We will work with the Water Board to persuade the legislature, and we have some success in this, to assist in funding the P&O study and other elements of the control programs. This is a public health endeavor, and its continuing general fund support is wholly appropriate. While we recognize the effort to broaden CV salt's participation, SIPA recommends against extensively involving the water rights permitting process. The inclusion of statewide water rights program is probably an invitation to litigation and needless complications. To conclude, on the latest staff revisions on page I-2, there is an item on limitations on the authorization of new or expanded allocations of assimilative capacity. In this paragraph under the first bullet, the term exceedance is deleted and added is a significant salt increase. It's I-2. We believe that retaining the prior language is probably the best way to go because the exceedance is definitive and significant salt increase is rather subjective and imprecise. In conclusion, we associate ourselves with Valley Water Management, and we hope that boron is addressed as part of the triennial review, and we'll do what we can to contribute to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
What page is that on?
Patrick's looking for.
We're looking.
I-2 is the appendix? I-2. So second page of the appendix, and it's under the section where it's supporting selection under the conservative permitting approach. So one of the. Yes, late revision. Late revision, sorry. I'm in I-2, I'm in the original.
That's it.
Yeah. So the context of the change has to do with the fact that we were in the conservative side of the permitting strategy. And if you're waiting until you have an exceedance, then that means you've already are degrading above the water quality objective. And on the conservative side, we're really looking at the anti-degradation policy. So we don't want to have degradation. That's why the exceedance term was changed to significant increase. And I understand the discomfort with the term significant because that's variable and that's up to the discretion of the board.
Kind of like saying measurable.
Yes.
So what is your recommendation?
Mine or theirs?
To go back to exceedance or to go with significant increase? Bob's shaking his head and strong positive.
Come on back up here, Bob. We want to talk to you.
As we manage salt, you know, I personally believe there's a need for staff to work on the conservative side. Staff has a lot of discretion, maybe too much discretion for that some dischargers feel comfortable with. But that's why I think it's important to have a public process as we go down the road. So folks have the opportunity to weigh in. We work the board to death, unfortunately. Is there a compelling reason to change it from back to exceedance from what it is now?
So Dr. Long, if I can, this is in real, like Jeannie said, Bob,
Conservative side.
this is just about the conservative permitting approach. These are the people who are not going to be participating in the P&O study. So they're going to be subject to pretty conservative standards to demonstrate that they aren't going to be causing problems. And this particular language is around whether the board should even consider expanding or adding, giving them any allocation of assimilative capacity. And so, to me, a significant salt increase is more appropriate than the exceedance that was struck, that was deleted. So this is, I don't see many of your facilities that you represent falling under this conservative permitting approach. So it's really more the POTWs or stormwater group that are looking for this.
There are a few hardy souls who've indicated they may consider going on the conservative side, but your assumption is correct. The vast majority of petroleum producers will be a coalition.
Maybe on the east
members.
side with pretty high quality water.
My-
But
if-
yeah.
One more thought. When you say exceedance, you hit a mark and you're in trouble. I view it as the standard is as you approach an exceedance. The exceedance is a definitive limit, and you can see that you're approaching it, and that's when you run into trouble. But significant is still completely subjective. Not to say that we don't trust the staff, we do, so.
Well, it's really, this would be for the board, and for the, what staff would use to recommend to the board. Obviously, we could not give any assimilative capacity if it was causing an exceedance of a water quality objective.
Right.
So this is really for the board to determine, and it's up to their decision and based on what staff recommends on what constitutes significant. It could be 20 for one person and 2 for another. It all depends on the circumstances.
And I think to take a look at the legal aspects of this, So what we're talking about is a discussion about assimilative capacity less than regulatory water quality objective thresholds. So the standard isn't an exceedance. The standard is an increase, a consumption of assimilative capacity. So that correction was made because it's legally incorrect before.
Thank you very much. So, at this point in time, we ready for the next panel. And I tell you what, I'm going to have to take about a 7-minute break.
Just 7, huh?
We're back here at 4:30. We get prepared to the last stretch going into 8 o'clock tonight. We'll have our wine and dinner out here while they're talking. We toast each other.
How many more people after this panel?
Nobody, I think. No, most. We're back in session, folks. We're ready for the Central Valley Salinity Coalition.
Those of you who had the last panel starting at 4:30, you win.
They win what?
Good afternoon. My name is Rob Neenan. I'm president of the California League of Food Producers. We're a statewide trade association representing the food processing industry in California. Joining me on the panel this afternoon are 3 other members of the discharger community, 2 from agriculture, 1 from POTWs. And we've all been involved with CV salts from the beginning and have the scars to show for it. We thought, given the advancing hour, rather than launching into our prepared remarks, that if the board wanted to ask us some questions right off the top based on other issues that are raised today, of questions specific to dischargers, we'd be glad to do that as a way to move through our 20 minutes.
So I'll ask one question. I think one of the themes from the environmental justice community was the hammer wasn't big enough in this process. Where do you guys, how do you see that as far as time schedule and what happens if we get down the road and things aren't working out? How do you guys feel this process lays out that end of the road for this?
I think, speaking for my members, I think the hammer is plenty big. I think that although the time frame seems extended to some, I think people are going to have to move quickly to come in compliance. We're urging our members to consider what they're going to do now, not wait for the passage, the ultimate passage of these basin plan amendments. And clearly the regional board isn't ceding its authority to regulate wastewater discharges. That's not going to change. And I'm advising my members to take this very seriously and get going. I don't know how the other panelists would.
JP, I'm sure you have comments on that one.
I'm reminded of the saying, the beatings will continue until morale improves. I think the hammer is plenty big, and it's really not about how big or small it is, but how it's being wielded and whether it's driving us in the right direction. But I don't feel at all like this is letting us out of anything. If anything, and I'll get to it in my prepared remarks, but this is setting up for a very large lift for folks, so it's going to mean doing more, not less.
Hi, Debbie Webster, Central Valley Clean Water Association. And my perspective, because my membership is of communities, and communities that basically take the water that's been consume water and then treat it from there. We do look at our communities as a whole. We look at it from start to end, not just at the start. But the start impacts the end, and the start is important to the same customers that we're treating their end products from. So, I say if you're asking me is the hammer there, it's yes. But only going to succeed if we succeed together. And our communities are going to be hurt if agriculture doesn't succeed. And if agriculture doesn't succeed, our people are not going to succeed. And so together, we're really going to need to face this. And whether or not we're a community that has a POTW at, or we're a part of a community where we're on septics, or we have a community water system, or we have our own well, we are all going to need to work together. I think this program is set up to be collaborative, to work on the hard solutions, to give the flexibility, so that we can actually get real and practical solutions.
So from agriculture, at least my perspective in agriculture, I look at this different. What we're doing here is we're changing the Basin Plan Amendment, right? And we're adding on some more requirements, significant, I mean, enormous requirements really for us to be part of management zones, to provide, drinking water to every impacted user in the Central Valley. Think about that. I mean, Patrick read that language in response to one of those. That is enormous, right? But on top of that, that's not the only thing we have, right? We're also implementing through the Irrigated Lands Program the existing basin plan. So you look at what agriculture's doing right now and what we just went through with the revisions to the East Side Order and all of those issues with nitrogen management plans and nitrogen summary reports, our nitrogen protection, our groundwater protection targets on top of that, sampling drinking water wells. This program is not just CV salts when it comes to protecting nitrates in drinking water from an irrigated lands, or from, the dairies have their own dairy program. So you can't just look at this program and see what is the stick that's being wielded upon us. It's much larger than just this basin plan, but this adds a significant effort and benefits to the community in this basin plan amendment. So I would say it's plenty big enough stick.
David, thank you for pointing out all the other things that are happening, which are really part of one program, in a sense. If you look in Irrigated Lands Program, and particularly with the changes to the East San Joaquin Order, the reporting requirements there on nitrogen, this gets to some of the issues on whether or not folks are over applying. Over time, you'll be able to see those trends, and the fact that you have to do any well that's impacted and so forth. And that's not necessarily read into the basin plan, but that's something you're required to do on a daily basis. So I think that was a good addition. So are you prepared to give additional comments? Let's talk about boron.
I was just going to say boron. That sounds a lot like this whole entire meeting, but no.
Oh, David, that was bad. It's getting late in the day, I guess. So, and I'll address this primarily to you, since you represent the farming community, and of course, to JP. How important is it for you as a farmer right now, over time, recognizing that we'll be concentrating salts as we go down the road, and in drought periods you have significant concentrations of salt occurring in your water? How much damage are you seeing now? How important from an economic standpoint, because this becomes more of an economic standpoint for ag than a public health issue, is it that we really bear down on boron?
Well, I mean, it's hard to know in terms of yields what's impacted by what that might be in the water, whether it's a boron impact or not, because there's so many other variables in terms of actually wearing my farmer hat. So do I know why my rice yields are down this year, or whatever other crop you're growing, cotton? Is it because of boron in the water? Was it because of high salinity? I don't really know. But, agriculture certainly concerned about boron issues. We certainly, within the water districts, you definitely look at those boron numbers, and especially on trees and those sorts of things. In the Lower San Joaquin River process, we looked at boron, and all of that is very important to boron. So I think if you're asking me specifically, do I think we should make the changes on boron that were advocated, or what do you, is that, I mean,
Well, you can comment on that, yes.
I mean, I'm okay with where the board left it.
Okay. I do think we need to continue to looking for, and if necessary, develop the good science. There's also issues on treatability that need to be answered.
Well, on broader salinity issues, I mean, we face a huge battle going forward, or challenge going forward, to come up with a rational salt policy, for the valley, and that's what we're going to do with phase one of what I call CV Salts 2.0. I mean, it's an enormous effort, and it's going to have long-lasting impacts on all of the Central Valley, not just agriculture. We're going to take that up right away and really start working on that salinity issue. Right now, for my particular farm, being in the selenium impacted area, we're spending enormous amounts of money just trying to deal with the selenium issue and curtailing that and minimizing those discharges to the San Joaquin River. I mean, and we see those costs going up, not down. So we have huge efforts in that regard, and we need to figure out how to get ahead of this and head that off at the pass in a comprehensive salinity management program going forward. And that's why I think it's really important in that P&O, especially in the first phase, the P&O study, that we have everybody at the table. I mean, that's one of the things we had with really this first portion. We focused mainly on nitrates, and we came up with a really good comprehensive program that's going to address nitrates. If we don't have everybody at the table, it's going to be really hard to come up with a salinity management plan. And that's not just the folks who discharge the most salts, but it's those folks, all the folks in the valley who are using water, and the exporters. We got to come together. And some people might not see their own self-interest, that they really should be at the table. I think this board needs to induce them to realize what their self-interest is, come to the table and be part of that discussion, because we got to come up with something that works for the North Valley, for the Delta, and for the South Valley, both west and east side. Everybody's has to be here, and even those folks outside of the valley have an interest in it. So I really hope that the board supports that, especially in the first phase. Later phases, we'll know more, and that may be a different program going forward.
The things that you've heard today that impact POTWs, is there anything that you want to add to the discussion?
That was a loaded question after 10 years of this. Okay. So, I think to the discussion, I think overall, and I would say even on this table, is that let me back it up by first saying thank you to the board again, and to Ms. Creedon, and to board staff, and to the others, and my colleagues here, that have been part of this process, that have supported the process financially, that have supported the process with their time, that have supported good science to try to come up with reasonable solutions that actually can be implemented, and we've tried them. But our real big test, we're at the edge of the diving board, and you guys are saying go, and we're about to jump. And we want to make sure that we're swimming. And if there's obstacles, if we start seeing some things that need changes, we're going to need to come back so that we can make this work. It's important to make this work. And part of the reason why we're here is because under the existing regulatory structure, we can't make it work. And so I would say that might sum up where things are at. Certainly there was areas that were talked about today that I was like, and where the board direction went with things on POTWs, I was fine with. We weren't going to be touching with, but I really think in moving forward, as we get tried and true, and we get better at it, if there's obstacles because of a basin plan, that we really should be addressing them.
Thank you, Debbie. Any questions that board members wish to ask of the panel? Go Go ahead.
I kind of wonder about the P&O studies and the costs associated with that and the pushback from the clients. Can you comment on that at all?
Everyone that I talk to, I represent, who I talk about another 10 years of CV Salt is really excited about it.
You didn't tell them 200 years?
Look, it's scary. We had the seed money to sort of help jumpstart this process to begin with from the state board. And thank you very much, Tam, if you're still back there in the state board in getting this process going. Without that, it would have been really hard. Any money you have left in your pockets, we'd be happy to utilize it because we have an enormous effort to go through. But we're going to scrounge together the money and put this together and keep this effort going. I mean, the work's just beginning. It's going to be expensive and a lot of time, but we understand the importance of it.
We want to be able to reward you if you do a quality job, I guess.
I guess I'd ask the same question of Rob. I mean, how does your industry or group of folks?
I don't see contributing to the P&O study to be a real obstacle. If you've got a food processing plant sitting there that's worth tens of millions of dollars and you want to keep that operating, investing in the P&O study and finding solutions that long-term are going to allow you to operate and hopefully operate cost effectively, I tell my members it's a pretty good investment. I don't see it as an obstacle.
Any further questions from board members? Okay, you still got time. Give us your thoughts.
I'll move quickly. First of all, I'd like to thank the board staff and the executive officers, both incoming and outgoing, for all their work on this process. They provided excellent leadership, and it's been greatly appreciated. There are literally hundreds of food processing plants in Central California, and we've been involved with this process from the inception for really several reasons. First of all, many of those plants have waste discharge requirements where they discharge wastewater to their own land application sites. Some are discharged to POTWs, so they'll be affected indirectly. But also, Central Valley Food Processors purchased about $11 or $12 billion worth of fruits, nuts, vegetable, milk from farmers. So any regulations that affect the cost of doing business for farmers is going to affect the cost of business for food processors. And then finally, most all food processing plants, not all of them, are located in rural communities, many in disadvantaged communities. And the people who work for those companies live there, their families are there, their workers live there, and obviously they care about water quality in their communities and want to be part of the solution. I wanted to comment very quickly on a couple of process aspects. First, I think the stakeholder process worked. There certainly were some bumps along the way and some challenges, but I think everybody who wanted to come to the table and voice their concerns was welcome to come and was listened to, and I think we did our best to accommodate their concerns. And reflecting back to a point earlier, we recognize going forward there is an educational component that's going to have to be part of developing management zones, and we recognize that going forward that's going to be an investment that's necessary. I'd also like to just mention that the technical work done by the consultants really gives this document a sound scientific foundation. And another process element was that those of you who were involved know that I was kind of a cynic a couple years ago and was concerned this wasn't going to work. But the thing that has sold me on this is, and Jeannie described it at length, is that dischargers have compliance options for both salinity and for nitrate. And to be clear, and I think it's been stated by others, none of these options are cheap or easy. We're talking about immense amounts of money, but having the flexibility to choose your compliance path, choose the most cost-effective path, and hopefully innovate, that was all we were asking for. Not all, but much of what we were asking for out of this process. And so the League of Food Processors supports these basin plan amendments because we think they'll work. We think they'll reach the objective of providing safe drinking water to the people who need it soon, and also improve the quality of the water in Central Valley, both surface water and groundwater. And we're confident this is the best path forward for two reasons. First of all, the stakeholder group looked at a lot of options. I would use the analogy of a Rubik's Cube. We kept spinning around till we could align both the technical and legal elements for something that would work. And clearly another way you could spin that cube would be a command and control approach. And I think this was alluded to earlier. Clearly the board could set very restrictive discharge limits, short compliance timeframes, and shut people down who don't comply with that. But in our view, first of all, that's not going to provide safe drinking water in the near term for people who need it. And second of all, if you shut down the farmers and the food processors in the very communities we're trying to serve, I think that's a self-defeating process. And so we think that that element of this makes sense, that we avoid a command and control approach. Second of all, this approach puts a lot of responsibility in the hands of the dischargers and the management zones to solve problems, and that's a good thing. And I think some people maybe earlier today had a sense that this is letting people off, or that dischargers will go do what they want to do for 5 or 10 years and not be held accountable. And I think I'm stating the obvious, but the regional board will continue, I'm sure, to exercise its authority over water quality and enforce regulations. And if there's management zones or dischargers who aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing or saying what they're doing, I'm confident that you're going to take action. But the difference here is this is going to be a bit of an experiment. It's going to be a collaborative approach with a wide range of stakeholders, and not just the dischargers sitting here, to solve problems. It's not unique in California regulations, but it's unusual. And I think in a maybe a sick sort of way, I think it's kind of exciting. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be expensive, and I'm sure there's going to be some disappointments along the way. But I think this collaborative approach to this problem is the only way we get there. And I'd just like to conclude by going back to that very first meeting that Dr. Longley spoke about. At the very first meeting I was there, and Dr. Longley talked about civilizations that collapsed because they didn't manage their water resources carefully, and they let salinity build up in the soil, and they were no longer able to feed themselves. And I think that was a rather ominous beginning, and maybe a foreshadowing of the days ahead. But I think we can avoid that situation here in California. I think due to the leadership of Dr. Longley, the hard work by the regional board, and the work of the stakeholders, I think we can develop a path forward. We would urge the board to pass these basin plan amendments, and we look forward to working with you and staff to implement them over the coming years and make this a success. Thank you.
A comment on that. I won't be here to see it. Obviously, it would be exciting to see the fact that we don't go the tried and true path that other civilizations have gone, and we prosper and solve our problems. But I think technology gives us that edge.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. I'd echo Rob's comments there. I think that this is a ambitious but an important and effort that we've gone through and that we're going into. Again, I'd say collaboratively, we're going to need to work on this. But one thing you touched on, and I didn't talk about it as much, is just really the importance of more than just your regulated community being the participants in this process. Your basin plan, when it talks about water quality protection, and excuse me, Dr. Longley, because I know you've heard me say this several times, but for those other board members that don't, if you read on the water quality objectives, there's some preface parts of it. And one of them is that, our impacts to beneficial uses are based on both water quality and water quantity. And so when we use water, we have an impact. And when we use water and we don't return it and it goes other places, it has impacts. And so today you heard a little bit about, hey, well, we're not contributing to the salt problem, but that is happening. Everybody that comes here, that works here, that uses water from the Central Valley contributes to salt and nitrate. I mean, we are salt and nitrate machines in a lot of ways. That's something that you just don't, that people, we concentrate it and we need it for our energy and for growing and for living. And so we have that, and those are not going to go away. So, we would urge the board and to be on the team with the rest of us that are working forward on the POTW, on the P&O, see, I say POTW too often, so on the P&O study, to bring in those other players. And as we move forward into the different phases, that those that are appropriate, that are going to be benefiting from those projects continue to participate. And those are not always going to be your regulated community. And so that's going to be an important part. But also, as we talked about this whole process, it has been a lot of give and take. And, certainly I feel like I feel like there is a going, how do we put it, that to succeed again, we are going to need to be doing this together. And that means that it's not just, again, the regulated, but it is going to be at a state level, well, it might be at a federal level. We're going to need to use different resources because we know that our communities are small. We know our communities, many of them are disadvantaged. And those are the people that are living and working here. And it's not just some big, brother that can come in and put all the money in. It comes from us too. And so, so I look forward to that collaboration. Again, I really appreciate this process. I know for the POTWs, for those communities, the ability to be able to resolve some things using different tools so that they can get the best outcome is important. And so thank you for that, and we urge support of this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm JP Cataviella with Dairy Cares. Thanks for the opportunity to address you today. I'm reminded of marriage. 11 years ago this month, we met in this room, and some of you, Pamela was here, adopted the dairy order, and that was a big deal. I mean, and the analogy both sides used was, this is a marriage, we're going forward together, like it or not, we're stuck, and we're going to work together for a long time.
And divorce is not feasible.
Divorce was not an option, right? No. And I understand marriage. I've been married for 22 years and must be doing something right. I'm also thinking about it today because I remember the day, I really looked forward to the day of, my marriage. But when I actually got there, it was kind of a little scary, because you're like, oh my God, I'm really doing this, right? And I have that feeling today because we have been working for a long time to get to today. And it's a big deal. But I'm scared because I want this to happen, but I know what we're signing up for, and it is a huge lift. So I guess I'm here to say, dairy supports this plan, but it scares the heck out of us because we know what we're signing up for. We're going in with our eyes open, and this is a big deal. So with that, I'll just address a few things I heard today, and maybe just I'll a couple points I want to make. One of them is, I heard the question today after some heartbreaking stories, and I never feel good about hearing that somebody doesn't have water, whether it's one family or one small community. It's terrible to hear those stories, And the question was asked, who's to blame? And I wanted to know, is it the dairy or is it the orchard? Who's doing this to me? And Dr. Longley, answered that it's coming from a variety of sources. These are a well-established set of facts where it's coming from and that agriculture is contributing to it. But I would just propose that it's time to move forward with a new question. It's not who's to blame. It's who's going to do something about this. Who's going to make this different? And I can't speak for everyone, but we are going to be part of it. The dairy industry is going to be part of this solution at this point, and moving forward. We have been part of this process. We've invested millions in research and monitoring to understand better what is going on and what we can do about it. We've invested many millions more than that in compliance with the existing regulations, which are stringent, and I would argue the most stringent dairy regulations in the nation. And we are working at the national level because this is not something that's just happening in California. We have issues with dairies across the United States, even across the world, and we're looking at innovations that will help us do a better job. But we recognize, despite all of that we've done, it's not enough. We have to do more, and we're ready to do that. Again, scared but ready. It's a heavy lift. We recognize that we have to do more practices and better practices than what we're doing now to achieve the solutions that we're all looking for, and that we're going to have to contribute to solutions. I respectfully disagree with Rob on one point, which is that maybe for the food processors, but the SAMP and the P&O studies, that's going to represent an additional significant investment for us, along with the cost of the practices. I've had the unenviable job of going to my industry and telling them to expect their costs to triple over the next few years as we comply and implement new practices and that sort of thing in the environmental compliance area. But I want to also give some context. I do disagree with the analysis that was just sort of thrown out today that farmers have just been over-applying vast amounts of fertilizer to crops. I don't think that's right, and I don't think it's fair. I think the farmers in this state have been following recommendations that led us to be one of the greatest agricultural states in the world, and really one of the leaders of the Green Revolution back in the 60s. So the universities, private industry, innovators have developed ways for us to be 10 times as productive with our land as we were a century ago. And we've all enjoyed the benefits of that, the economic benefits, the food benefits, so many benefits from that. I don't like to see that painted as irresponsible. I think it's been the opposite. It's been responsible, innovative, smart, and leadership. But we've learned that those practices have an impact on the environment and that we can do a better job with that. And so I don't know why it's not okay to say both of those things, to give folks credit for being responsible, but also say, hey, there's impacts. We're learning of those, and we have to do a better job. So I would like to just, for the record, say both of those things are true. I heard the comment today, and I thought it was again a misrepresentation of what's going on here, but it's that we can't trade water today for pollution tomorrow. And I would just respectfully say that is not the deal that is on the table today. The pollution's here. The impacts are present. The problem is the solutions aren't. The solutions to that are not here, and our current situation pretty much allows us, a lose-lose option only. The board can tell us to stop discharging and destroy our economy, and nobody gets any water. And really, the proposal today changes that game. It says you can have a choice. It doesn't guarantee the outcome, which is, I think, when you're hearing negative comments today, people want guarantees. All we can guarantee is we're going to try. But this today gives us a chance to do that. It gives us a choice between lose-lose, which is what we have now, and win-win, which is what we can have if we work hard. The work is beginning. It's not over. As much as we'd like it to be over after the process we've been through, we've just created an opportunity, if you adopt this today, to do the work that really needs to be done. So we're ready to do that. We support this proposal because we think it gives us a fighting chance to get that future. Thank you.
Thank you, JP.
Okay, David Corey, chair of the Central Valley Salinity Coalition. I just want to reiterate what my colleagues have said and realize that we're really on the cusp of really doing the real hard work, what we've talked about. When you look at the process that was set up here, and Carl, you started it, and Pamela, you sort of put us in motion and set up this process that really was a remarkable process in what we've put together. The camaraderie that we've got between the permittees, the dischargers, if you will, but also with the environmental justice community and all the stakeholders in this. This process has really benefited enormously, not only in a well-crafted basin plan amendment, but in those bonds that we've developed between the stakeholders and with the environmental justice community. It's paid off not only within the process that we've seen in the document you're considering before you today, but outside of that, wearing my ag hat. We understand the issues that the EJ folks are facing. I've seen representatives of different industries represent the EJ folks' position in a meeting because they know that's what needs to be there. In the East Side order that was in front of the state board, we met with the EJ folks and came up with really quite novel ideas that we were proposing and supported the idea of groundwater protection targets. That's agriculture and EJs working together. We also have agricultural representatives, including myself, who are out there advocating for a tax on our fertilizers, not a tax, but taxes on our fertilizers to help fund the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. These are direct results of this process. I mean, a direct tie between both of those processes and this process. So what I'm telling you today is you're not only getting a well-crafted basin plan amendment, one that the stakeholders sitting at this table are not looking to challenge and sue you. Mainly in a lot of the basin plan amendment processes, we're sitting here with our attorneys, putting in comments, trying to figure out, how can we challenge this in court? We're not looking to do that. What you've got is a basin plan amendment that we're looking to support and we're looking to implement. So you get an amazing package as I see it. You get the basin plan amendment, but you also get the stakeholders behind it to do the hard work and implement it. And I think that package is something that you can't turn down. And we're committed to working through this and working on the issues. If we get something wrong, we're going to fix it. If we have things we haven't thought about, we're going to fix those and we'll work on it. You've got a committed bunch of very talented people who will make this work. So thank you for giving us the opportunity, Pamela, Carl, all of board staff for putting this together. We're going to make it work.
And thank you for being taking a great leadership role in this, David, stepping up front to put the coalition together.
I'd like to make a comment.
We got a comment to be made. Sorry, JP.
Yeah, I'm very thankful that we're getting to the conclusion of this process. I've heard the stories of the history, and I'm coming in on the tail end of the last quarter. But I'm amazed at looking at the participants, the stakeholders, and the comments that have been made throughout this process. And many of the communities benefit from ag sources, food, employment. It's the business and the industry. And many of the communities have been impacted. That's a given. That's why we're here. But as we said earlier today, outreach and education is important to the communities that have been impacted, for them to understand what's happened to the water and what they need to understand about that water that could have some effects on them. And I would also say that as I've watched the efforts of the coalitions go forth with the irrigated lands, we now have another opportunity, and it behooves this body, the group I'm talking to right now, to work with the discharges. Because if we don't have the outreach and education, as we've seen with the others, then we have the ACLs and we have all the things coming, and that's the hard work you're talking about. But I think that's where you really do have to dig in and say, we're in it, and we're in it to win, and the discharges have to really be on board with this. So I commend the efforts of the staff and all of you that have come forth and really came together and consensus building to make this happen.
And we definitely understand the commitment we're making to outreach to the communities who are impacted by this. And, we've done it. I think Jeannie talked about our WIC program and trying to work with self-help and coming up with a pilot project to figure out how you can get clean water to the most vulnerable populations of pregnant women and infants. And we're actually doing that. We're actually supplying water to them. I mean, it's a small group, but it's really a pilot project that we're growing. We did that on our own to learn, to sort of figure out what our early action plans might be. Haven't really talked about it a whole lot, but we're learning from it and learning how to expand that, learning how to do that with other groups. And we know we have to work with the local communities. I think that what's the management zone helps us do is this takes this big process from a big CV Salts Central Valley wide down to the local level, where we're going to be working more with local partners and figuring out how to get that word out to the impacted communities and address these very difficult problems, because all the problems that the EJ community brings up are real and challenging.
Okay, but my outreach and education piece was to the discharges.
Oh, well,
that they be educated.
I got that
because
too.
When you have, like I said, with the irrigated lands, when people aren't doing their farm evaluation saying, oh, we just blow this off and wait until we, that's not going to help the program move forward. So the outreach and education, you heard us say about the communities. Now it behooves you to work with the discharges to make sure that they're working with to help make this happen. So when we come back, we'll have success stories to tell, as we've had with irrigated lands and many of the other programs that have been implemented.
Yeah, the reason I didn't understand it is I just took that as a given, and we've been working so hard with farmers
said
to
it's a
figure it
given,
out. So,
but we see people that don't respond in the proper way.
Yeah,
And,
but-
and we have that responsibility too. So
we understand it goes for education both sides, so
Thank you.
we appreciate it.
Dr. Longley,
Yes, ma'am.
as one of the newest board members on this board, I wanted to say that coming in and learning about CV salts, and it's really, I think, really amazing when you get a group of so many different parts of the community members come together to work on a project like CV salts, and so many different groups, and just to hear JP and his comments, it's really refreshing. I'm not used to that, so I have to say, when you do see collaboration like this, you have to acknowledge it and you have to commend it, because it is so important. There's so many different, bureaucracy can be daunting, but to see a group like everyone here come together from different parts and work on something like this, I think this needs to be celebrated. I think it needs to be recognized, because this is a really great example of what happens when so many different community groups come together and ag industry comes together and we actually get things done. And this is a great example of, I mean, this is just a tremendous undertaking. What you guys have done is really amazing. And, you know, kudos to everybody involved. And thank you all.
Any further comments? Thank you. Thank you very much. I have some cards here. Representative for Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen, Regina. Regina, I have to apologize for you. I didn't even want to try to pronounce your last name. I know you've been here before, but I'm bad on names, as we found out this morning.
And Dr. Longley, you should have recognized her son. He's been here all day and has been so well behaved.
And Regina, have you taken the oath?
The oath?
I think you came in late. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? Is so? Answer, I do.
Sure, I do.
Okay.
A few of the things that I'm going to bring up have already been addressed, though, and so I apologize for that. If I do bring something that's been addressed up, because I know a lot's been addressed today, and this was written beforehand. First of all, I want to thank you. We've attended, I work for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association. It is a trade organization for commercial fishermen. We've been coming, do you guys, okay. We've been coming to some of the CV Salts meetings for a while now, and we have not, unfortunately, been able to participate at the level we'd like to, because commercial fishermen as industry are not doing very well, and we don't have very much money. But we do know that it's very important. Our comments are focused on surface water. And we would like to say that we are very concerned about some of the variances, drought exceptions, and permitted pollution that is proposed, and some of the water quality standards changes that have been made. We understand that you guys do need to be able to have some flexibility, but we would like to mention that the most sensitive beneficial use for some of the secondary contaminants and some of the beneficial uses that will be impacted are salmon and aquatic life, and they're not able to deal with filtered water or compliance points and things like that. They are where they are. So, and a lot of the contaminants that are also in drinking water that are a concern for drinking water are also a concern for salmon. We have, and so we support the drinking water advocates that have been here today because of that. We also have, throughout this process, suggested some some actions that have not actually been addressed, and we'd like to see them addressed. We feel like some of these large-scale solutions, such as the brine line and things like that, have not been proven to be effective. But there have been suggestions from people like Fish and Game of actually fallowing some of the most salt-impaired lands that could actually add to more water supply because. And we think that that's a good option because there's less pollution and more water to be used for dilution. So we'd like to suggest that that be looked into further because we feel like a lot of water is used to deal with the salinity issue that is not being able to be used to support the salmon. And also the salinity issue can also really affect aquatic life within the delta. So also we're really concerned about some of the leeway in the secondary path to compliance, and we would like to trust the agriculture industry, but we are looking at wide-scale pollution, and we just really want to make sure that beneficial uses are protected through this process. I actually had more comments, but I made copies of them so I could give them to you because I felt like this was about 4 minutes worth of comments and not 3, even without a kid hanging on me. So. Okay, but the last thing I wanted to say really quickly is that, we do not feel like the CEQA analysis actually looked into the impacts of aquatic life on the level it should have. And in the environmental checklist, I'm not done. And in the environmental checklist, we feel like that it's put off looking at cumulative effects and effects to aquatic life by saying that a lot of those actions are going to come, that affect aquatic life will come later. And that's not how we feel like CEQA works. So we would like to make sure further in the process as this goes on that impacts to aquatic life and fisheries are looked at closer and that cumulative impacts, especially with global warming and water supply, are looked at closer. Because a lot of, especially when it comes to the drought exceptions and things of that nature. Okay, sorry about the confusion about that. That's because it's been a really long meeting, so sorry. And I have 6 copies of the comments that are not distracted by a child, if anyone wants copies of them.
So-
They're only 3 pages long, so they would have been about 3 minutes if I was not distracted.
We've been prohibiting additional written comments that were received after the comment period. I think you got about another minute? I don't know what the board's
Yes,
pleasure
if you
is.
have another minute, we'll give you another minute to wrap up.
Oh, okay. Okay, so one of the things that we have here is we feel like a lot of the exemptions and variances, and especially when it comes to the drought policy, seem to be skewed in a way to benefit dischargers, and especially the drought policies and exemptions are concerning to us because there's less water supply during that time. So we're looking at more pollution and less water to be used for the dilution of the pollution. We also feel like as the salinity starts to build up more and more in the system, more water that could be used for environmental flows will be used to deal with the salinity issue. And so a lot of our comments are going to be based on the studies that come later on, but we do not feel like the brine line and these big technological and unproven solutions are going to be what works. And so we would like for options such as fallowing of land that is very salt impaired to be looked at closer. We also just feel like we need to make sure that there's not degradation happening. And so I wish I could not be so have a kid being crazy next to me. But anyway, as this process goes on, we're going to make sure that we turn in our comments in writing earlier on in the process. But we have been very engaged in this process, and we have suggested that more analysis of the impacts to fisheries happen. So we look forward to engaging. We thank you so much for your effort in this process, but please make sure while you're doing all this and while you're thinking of secondary contaminants and things of that nature, that the fisheries are considered because they don't have the 50-year timeline. They are facing extinction, as is our industry right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
I'd just like to hear from staff regarding the issue she's raised.
Yeah, no, I think there's there's a few issues here.
One thing, and then don't say anything. Go sit down.
Okay. Save the salmon. Wait. And all the other animals that live in the sea, and even the sharks.
Okay, thank you. Now go sit down, please. Okay. You can sit down.
Definitely the sharks. Yeah, I think there's what you're hearing from this board and what you're hearing from staff is going to be a very firm commitment to keep all parties, including Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen, engaged in the process as we develop these long-term solutions. I would add a couple things from the legal perspective. First, with respect to the secondary MCLs, in particular the metals that we've been discussing, those secondary MCLs are not intended to be a proxy for aquatic life protections. So where there are impacts, say, CTR constituents or other type of constituents, where there are toxicity to aquatic life, the board still has to protect the aquatic life. So the conversation about secondary MCLs is a little different. We still will protect aquatic life where wherever those aquatic life designations remain in the basin plan. With respect to the drought policies, I think we're trying the best we can to maintain progress towards salt reduction when we recognize that the droughts themselves will impact salinity simply because there's less water in the system. I think we're looking at load reductions to the extent that we're able to. The drought policy puts requirements on, even in times of drought, to keep the loads low, to keep the management practices going. As we've learned through the Lower San Joaquin process, it's not quite so simple that the drought's effects are just felt during the drought itself. Those drought effects can be felt afterwards as salt is flushed out of the system when it starts to rain again. And I think the drought and conservation policy recognizes the complexity with regulating for those type of impacts. And lastly, with respect to the brine line and the fact that we didn't analyze the impacts to aquatic life that could be imposed by the brine line, is that project design is so far off in the future that if we were to engage in those type of considerations at this point, it really would be purely speculative. We plan on doing a lot of engagement, a lot of studies over the next 10 to 15 years to figure out what the appropriate analysis will be. And if and when that brine line gets built, it will be absolutely subject to the most stringent regulatory standards that we've got.
The fact is, we bring about 7 million tons of salt into this valley a year. We have to move salt out of the valley unless we shut down the economy here.
Absolutely.
So whether it's that or it's making product, I prefer the latter. The other issue is when we talk about concentration of salt during times of drought, most of the impact from ag goes to groundwater, not to surface waters where you find salmon. Where we have the impact on surface waters is from the cities, from the POTWs, and that's a whole different game.
Yeah, and it's exceptionally complicated too, because often it's those conservation measures that can result in salinity increases even when loads are going down. And the drought and conservation policy recognizes this.
We're using less water to handle waste products, whether it be from industry or from humans.
Absolutely.
A large part of it's from humans. And that's where we get the concentration.
Yeah. If you're going to make a comment, it has to be in the mic.
Just to clarify, I'm not saying that I thought that the brine line should have been necessarily considered in this. I'm saying it's hard for us to even know what the impacts of the basin plan amendments are because there is no discussion of impacts of aquatic life from the basin plan amendments. And we are seeing where there's variances and different load allocations and degradation allowed, but it's because there is no actual discussion of impacts to aquatic life from discharges, and a lot of the discharges we're the most concerned about are actually the secondary discharges like selenium and things that are involved in the salt discharges that impact fish. It's very hard to know what the impacts are because there is no discussion in the staff report of that. I mean, there's discussion, of course, of the secondary contaminants, which also affect salmon, so we're able to make some guesses, but we didn't feel like it was full disclosure, and we'd like to see that more in the future so that we do know how to comment better.
Yeah. And I would say, I think some of you mentioned that there was a little bit of an overlap between your comments and the comments from the drinking water providers. And you mentioned in the area of secondary MCLs, but I actually think that the overlap is also with respect to the comments about what the board expects the increased loading to be. And I think the answer is much the same. It's going to be performance-based limits, but it's going to be a continuing application of the implementation of reasonable, feasible, and practicable efforts to control salt. So that whole litany of salt reduction strategies that have to be employed by NPDES dischargers, even when they're operating under the P&O study, the less conservative approach, it still imposes a heck of a lot of requirements to ensure that the loads don't go up, or any load that does go up is limited to the maximum extent practicable. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see that. It's not certainly a salt free-for-all. We don't anticipate there are going to be huge impacts due to increased loading as a result of this basin plan amendment. I think the more finer detail in terms of the subsequent CEQA analysis and subsequent analysis in terms of other impacts has to be when the capital projects do get built. And I think that we want your organization and other organizations to have a large voice in figuring out what those solutions are going to be over the next 10 to 15 years.
And recognize when, in the past, when certain agencies that I'll leave unnamed have talked about a brine line, they simply wanted to take agriculture drain water and put it into Carquinez Straits, and that was it. This isn't what we're talking about. And they were somewhat not completely honest with the public when they were making those statements. That line, specifically the San Luis Canal, would have been under an NPDES permit. In other words, it would have had to meet all the requirements of an NPDES permit. So the brine line we're talking about, and there's another brine line that I'd like to point to, and it's the one that's operated by SAPA in Santa Ana region. For it to be successful and to be able to discharge, it has to be able to discharge into a marine environment without impacting that marine environment in any way. More than likely, it'll be a sodium chloride stream, which are not the salts we have here, but you basically to go through RO and concentrate up, and it's going to have to be around 33,000 parts per million to go into that environment and not have an impact. So it's going to have to, we're going to have to change it from a calcium bicarb calcium sulfate dominated water to a sodium chloride water, more than likely, to be able to meet discharge requirements. And you're harvesting those other salts which have a commercial value.
One of the questions we brought up in this process that we'd like to see answered is whether or not the selenium impaired lands can even be included in this process, or like the lands like wetlands that are part of a federal drainage agreement. And I've seen other people comment on that, and we've commented on that, but those are the kind of answers we need to see fleshed out to know if this is going to just be salts, or if it's going to be salts and seleniums, or salts and pesticides. And so, and also, I mean, in Santa Ana, you don't have the endangered species concerns that you have in the Bay, so
you have to meet,
obviously there's a lot in play.
To discharge into water, you have to meet NPDES requirements. That's for selenium or any other material going in there. And so it has to be at a level where it's not going to have an impact on aquatic life. That's what this board has been operating on in the past, and I'm sure it'll continue to operate.
I sure hope that is true. We're very concerned, and we'll be very involved in the
Well, I'll
future,
tell you what,
we
you
hope.
got a good lawsuit on your hands. You'll probably win if we don't do that.
So, Dr. Longley, if I
Yes.
can, I'm glad I'm retiring. So I'll leave it to Patrick for that lawsuit. So the phase one of the P&O study really is to evaluate these alternatives, which will include what more in-valley solutions we can find, as well as out-of-valley solutions. Because right now, based on all the data we have and this technical foundation for this, is that all in-valley solutions can account for maybe 15% of the salt problem. So we have to find some way of dealing with the other 85%, which has to be considered. We have to consider out-of-valley options. He's doing fine. So we have to look at that. But like Dr. Longley is saying, you have to take home to your constituency. This will be a regulated brine line. So it doesn't really matter where the source comes from. What gets put into the bay will be what's regulated. As if it's like a POTW or an industrial discharge, there'll be standards put on it. So it's not just going to be whatever they feel like, and you have to accept it. So and as Patrick said, the phase one moves into phase two, and there's a whole new basin plan amendment and any project built out of this will have to do its supplemental environmental analysis. So all of that will be done. You'll be given more opportunity to comment on that. Okay.
I might point out that if it does go to the bay, decisions that be made on that will be very heavily influenced by the San Francisco Regional Board, which won't accept any degradation. So. Very good. I have a card from Andrea York. Following Andrea is Bobby Larson.
Good evening, Andrea York on behalf of the Almond Alliance of California, and we are pleased to be supportive of the revised basin plans and note that the almond industry is fully committed to ensuring that all Californians have access to clean drinking water, which is a fundamental human right. We are also deeply involved in researching and implementing innovative nitrogen management practices and ardently support SB 623 and the governor's budget, both which provide a path forward to permanently funding clean drinking water. So thank you to all the staff and the board, and we look forward to working with you as we move forward on this issue.
Thank you very much. Bobby? And then Tim Johnson. Oh, we're getting to the heavy hitters.
Thank you, Dr. Longley, members of the board. My name is Bobby Larson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, which is the statewide organization representing wastewater treatment plants, POTWs. I work very closely with Debbie Webster. I feel like we're at the point of the day where everything's been said, but not everyone has said it. So I'm here to be one of those people saying the same thing. And I think maybe given the retirement celebrations we had earlier, but there's a little bit of nostalgia for me as I'm standing up here today because it was 2006, May of 2006, so 12 years ago today, that I went to my board of directors and said, I want you to support this process and I want you to contribute money on behalf of this process. And they said, well, who else is doing that? And I said, there'll be some other people. There were really it was just David Corey's organization, Debbie Webster, and me, and that was it. And that's where we started 12 years ago. So, you deserve a lot of credit, this board, for your leadership, your vision, your executive officer, Pamela Creedon. I mean, she's the reason that this room is full of people, and it's not just me, David, and Debbie wondering why it didn't work. Also, and I hope board member Doduck is still here, because again, I want to acknowledge, as I believe David did, she was an early believer that we might be able to pull this off, and so she was very helpful in getting that State Water Board funding, which was crucial to getting those technical studies done and getting us moving. And then all of the staff who've worked so hard on this, Jeannie, Patrick, everybody, and my fellow stakeholders who've put in a lot more time than I have. I took a little break for a while in the process. So it's really, when I came into the regional board, I've been before this board in different hats in many ways, and this was the first time I came in almost with a feeling of celebration that we were at this point that was huge. And it's historic, it's groundbreaking because of the complexity and the scale of what you're doing with this Basin Plan Amendment. That's why my organization, which is statewide, is interested, because you're doing something precedent setting that maybe can be modeled throughout the rest of the state. And It's problem solving, it's action forcing, and it's locally led. And those to me are key elements of why this has a chance of working where other solutions might not. And I guess I'm running out of time, even though I'm talking really fast, that I just wanted to comment that I don't really understand why people think that practicable, feasible, and reasonable are bad things. If you look at what practicable means, it means capable of being done. Seems to me like that's what you would want if you're going to send us down a path to implement something, that it's capable of being done. And as a lawyer, I know there's always a lot of debate about what reasonable means, but the opposite of reasonable, I guess, is unreasonable, and that means that it's not rational, it's not guided by good judgment, and it's immoderate, and it's excessive. So I don't think that's where we want to be. I think we need to be on the side of reasonable, practical, and feasible. And so I urge you to adopt this amendment today. The work is just starting, as my colleagues have said, but it's clear-eyed, and it's real, and it's practical, and I think we can get it done the way that it's outlined. So thank you very much, and again, I urge you to adopt this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your support throughout this, Tim. And then we got a wrap up. Perry Clausen.
Thank you very much. Chairman Longley, members of the board, I'm Tim Johnson, President and CEO of the California Rice Commission. We represent the Rice Coalition under the WDR. We are here to offer our support from those green areas on those maps. We spent a lot of time talking about the formal part of the Central Valley, and I wanted to make sure that you had heard that there is strong support from those areas with good water quality. And really, we're supporting it because this Basin Plan Amendment allows us to continue to protect good water quality. It also fully engages us, and I have David Corey to thank for this, it fully engages us in the state's salt and P&O study, which, as he said, everybody has a stake in that, make sure that it goes well. I also wanted just to comment to this board and amplify those comments of my colleagues on CVSC. You may not fully appreciate what you have done here. You know, outside this process, there's been a lot of work that's gone on, but it's been driven by CV Salts. We have worked on 2 bonds. If successful, will provide $1 billion for disadvantaged communities for clean water and for wastewater. We are working on a legislative initiative that would provide operations and maintenance, as well as other services for replacement drinking water. That's significant. So look at what you have done. You've changed how we talk about water and water quality in the state of California. Most importantly, you've changed how we act. You really have an opportunity today to codify that 10 years of work in this Basin Plan Amendment that's before you. But more importantly, you have an opportunity today to codify and support what has become the hallmark of this board, which is the support of a process that gives everybody a voice, and the support of a process that emphasizes solutions over command and control. We strongly support the Basin Plan Amendment, appreciate this board for its leadership and its staff, and encourage your adoption today.
Questions? Tim, before you sit down, I also want to thank you for your steadfast support, for your wisdom and guidance throughout this total process.
Thank you, Carl, very much.
Barry?
Well, the last one to speak. Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the East San Joaquin Water Coalition. Thank you, Chair Longley and members of the board. Appreciate this last 8 years of being in the executive committee.
You've also been the CV Salts chair. You need to put that in.
I was getting to that. 8 years. And CV Salts, 7 years as chair. And Carl, my arm's better now. It's all right. I'm recovered from the day in the restaurant where we talked about CV Salts. But I am just, without words, to be able to describe the knowledge, understanding, and the intellect of the people I've been around for these 8 years. It's amazing sitting around in that room, hearing people talk about things you have no idea what they're talking about. but you know that it's really important. Because what we've come out of this process with is a basin plan that's unprecedented in this state. This is going to be putting forward to us something that only, JP used the analogy of a marriage. I think of it as buying 1,000 acres of open ground, and you're going to have nectarines on that orchard in that field in 10 years. And you have all your plans, you have everything ready to go, but you got a lot of work to get those trees to full maturity, and they're not going to be mature in a year. And I think what we have, what you have in front of you, despite what was said earlier, is you have so much flexibility and authority to tweak this orchard or this process as it goes forward. We have a lot of time. We're going to be coming in front of you, giving you progress reports on management zones and other things. This is a basin plan amendment. It's a framework, but there is a lot of work ahead of us. I think everyone around the table is here. As was mentioned earlier, we gave the CV Salts pledge. We were going to stick this thing out. We did. We've got a salinity coalition that's ready to go to work. We're not loving much of any of it, as was said, but we know the alternative is really not what we want to. What we saw a little bit of examples from the State Water Board enforcements earlier this year. We can't farm that way. We can't operate that way. So we see this as a path forward. As far as nitrates in groundwater, I know in the grower meetings that I've been putting on and others have been putting on in the last couple of years since the irrigated lands, growers don't like to be called polluters of the second most important input that they have on their farms, the first being water. Growers are getting improving their nitrogen applications. We are going to be a source control. We're going to lead source control so that we can minimize these impacts. But we also have a process in place with a P&O study and then salt and nitrate control program, where I think that we're going to look back years from now and say this is the start of a lot of really good work that's going to be done in this valley. And I guess the one other thing I'll end with, the only difference between this and CV Salts is we're going to go from a monthly meeting and to many of us a daily implementation of this program. So some of you that only have to go once a month, when we get in these management zones, these are going to be some super heavy lifting that's going to be happening insofar as these management zones.
Thank you very much, Perry. Are there any questions or comments?
Can I make one? Do I get 30
Sure.
more seconds? I need to roll on some accolades for you, Dr. Longley. I think that you've been a real mainstay to this program, Pamela as well. And others you didn't hear from today, Tim Moore and Tess Dunham. I mean, these folks have been really the brain power around getting this program together. Richard Meyerhoff, you don't see him much, but he's been a quiet writer of a lot of the things that you're seeing. Jeannie as well. Jeannie's the best. She's really helped us get this through these last 12 months. So again,
Well,
thank you.
a lot of this wouldn't have happened without Jeannie, but it also wouldn't happen without your leadership and with few meetings you couldn't make. Debbie did a great job of keeping the discussion going. And I'm going to go back to the very beginning. It took some seed money to get this started. I know you guys have put in a lot over the years. The state board has been very, very good at keeping this process going. But that first $1 million we got from TAM really is what got us going that first year. So we
That's
appreciate
right.
that.
We made good use of that.
Very
Thank
good.
you, Dr. Longley.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to address this board that I don't have cards from? Okay, good. At this point, we're ready for a closing statement by staff.
Okay, before we get to closing statements, I'd like to point out that you do have some late revisions in your packet. So, and we also have one late revision, hopefully, that can be passed out. The late revisions primarily provide editorial clarifications. They came from several of the comment letters and also some of the sections that staff found themselves when we actually had a little more time to read what we had put together. Try to find the right binder here. don't believe we have to go through these one by one, do we? Okay, good. So they're mostly just the editorial changes in the beginning. One thing I do want to point out is on page 9, and it had to do with the filtration discussion. It was pointed out that we had incorrectly identified the filtration component that was typical for water purveyors. The normal filter size, we had put down 0.1 and it's actually 1, so we wanted to make sure that that was corrected. The other thing that I would like to point out is some of the changes in the appendices. I mentioned them earlier. Appendix I is kind of a summary of how the SALT program would really work, and it uses a few examples. We expanded those examples to different discharger groups, and we did the same with Appendix J, which is the appendix discussing the nitrate program and how it would actually work on the ground. So we think that those were very good revisions. We hope you accept those. Then we have the resolution, which has been slightly updated. Do you want to cover that, Patrick? I think most of these are, again, just clarifications, especially that the nitrate pollution or the nitrate control program is really focused on groundwater, while the salt control program focuses both on surface and groundwater. We removed the reference number 22. We did not feel that that really added that much to the resolution. And then in the findings, under number 2, therefore be it resolved, we did want you to also approve the late revisions. So it's fairly straightforward.
And the late.
And thank you. There is a late revision. It was pointed out that there had been an agreement at the last CV Salts Executive Committee meeting. Do you have it with you now? Did
That's
it
what
get
Karen
passed
just
out?
handed out.
Okay. There was phrasing that was contained in the paragraph, and it had to do with the fact that we were creating kind of a loop where by saying if any material change occurred, there could not be any additional assimilative capacity. There was just, we had tied ourselves up in a loop, so we just had to take the one line out that said any material change, because the change could have been growth, it could have been an improvement, it could have been whatever else might be happening at the facility, and we wanted to make sure that any MPDS discharger had the ability to still have the board discretion to consider any previously approved assimilative capacity. We had inadvertently knocked ourselves out of that loop, so we were taking that particular language out. Okay.
Okay, and in the resolution, therefore it be resolved, when you say with board approved late revisions, that would that language is good enough to include late? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So that's that packet. Do I do the timeline before you do a statement? So the next steps in the timeline would be the hearing today. We anticipate within the next year, we're not exactly sure when, we will have state board consideration for approval. Then by September of 2019, we would have the administrative law consideration of approval, and at that point, all the groundwater components would be effective. And then the components that would be subject to US EPA approval would go to US EPA. We anticipate that approval decision coming in December of 2019. The issuance of notice to comply emails would then come 1 year after the effective date. So for the groundwater components, 1 year after September 2019. And then for the surface water components, 1 year after December 2019. So it's staff recommendation at this time to adopt the resolution, to approve the staff report and its supporting environmental documentation, adopt the basin plan amendments into the Central Valley Basin Plans with approved late revisions, and direct the executive officer to forward the amendments to State Water Board, the Office of Administrative Law, and US EPA as appropriate for approval.
Thank you. Any questions? Pamela, as the executive officer, what is your recommendation?
Can I say a couple words?
You sure may.
Thanks. So I want to really appreciate and thank everyone that's here, and lots of accolades towards me today, but really I was just doing what I was told to do at the direction of the board. And so it's thanks to State Board, Tam, and Darren Polhemus for their continued support of this process throughout the time. And also, but more importantly, we had Daniel Kozad, Tim Moore, Tess Dunham, Bobby Larson, David Corey, Perry, Tim Johnson. I really put a lot of, I had a lot of discussions with Tim, and I so appreciate the fact that he really stepped up. He included us in lots of discussions with the President's Council, and so that we could start making the pitch about CV salts. So, and it was just an effort that a core group of people just kept working on. And it's like I always told staff here, we had a mountain to look at. It was a problem. It was a huge mountain, and you can't look at the whole mountain and try to figure out what to do. You've got to put it into smaller, biteable pieces, and I think that's what we've achieved with this process. We've created a program that doesn't get everything all at once. It puts it over time. It prioritizes it. It puts it into perspective, and it's a doable process. It's not going to be easy, but nothing that's beneficial in life tends to be easy for anyone. So I heard someone say that what we've put here today is a high likelihood of failure. I would suggest that the process we put in place has made it so that we have a high likelihood of success, because it does do that prioritization. It ensures that people will get safe drinking water so that we have the time to do what we need to start chipping away at that mountain of an issue. So it's not, I'm sure it's not perfect. I would love to say it is. I'm sure it'll be back. Patrick and staff will have to be bringing it back for some fixes here and there. We'll sit there and say, oh gosh, of all the things we thought about, there's something we didn't think about, and it's just going to have to be a tweak here or there. But this document that you have with the late revisions is something that is implementable. It will lead to success. It will get us moving forward, and that's where we need to be going. And it didn't surprise me it took this long at all. Something this big and involves so many people, and the messy issues we had to deal with. It needed this time in the oven, so that what came out was something that is edible and presentable. So I think we did a good job, and Jeannie and her staff and Littlejohn really did some heavy lifting here, and they just deserve so much credit for this, because without that it would not have happened. And unfortunately, Jeannie's retiring in a month and a half, and I'm retiring, so we won't get to see this through, but it's in good hands, someone who has also been here for 12 years. So with that, I do highly recommend, strongly recommend, that the board adopt the plan as proposed with the late revisions.
Thank you very much. I'll close the meeting at this point and leave discussion, deliberation, and voting to the board.
So just time to comment before we.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So those of you who know me and have been around, I've only been here 6 years, 7 years, something like that. So this was started before I got here, but I'm a big process guy. I'm a big stakeholder guy. Solutions that don't work aren't really that welcome. And what I heard today from both industry and the farming community and the POTW community and others was that the current system was sort of a cul-de-sac, and we needed a road to get to where we're going. And it's a long road, and it may be uphill, and all those analogies, but it's at least the road that folks can be on. So I certainly appreciate that you know, we talk about a stakeholder process. You know, I've never seen one so in-depth and so wide-ranging. Normally, regulations and the government come from top down, and you see the battles that are happening all over the place. So I really do appreciate the folks, and I won't mention names because they've been mentioned many times, but you know, this is a process where as a board member, I don't think I did a whole lot other than, you know, said yes a few times to keep it going. You know, Carl did most of the work on the board side, but you know, I'll take pride in this when it gets adopted, because I think it is something. When I tell my kids, you know, I'm going to a board meeting tomorrow that's taken 12 years to get here, they look at me like, what's wrong with government? And I tell them there's nothing. This is an important issue that's just taken that long. So I see the momentum. I see an implementation path. I see certainty. I think Rob talked about certainty. And you know, I hope that you know, when we do come back, that the success stories we are hoping for are part of this mix. So you know, I will move this with late revisions, and I guess that's it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? John's moved and Dan has seconded. One more time. I don't see any further discussion. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Costantino?
Aye.
Dr. Dr. Markham?
Aye.
Ms. Brower?
Yes.
Ms. Kadara? Yes. Dr. Longley?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody. There's way too many people to thank for this. It is with some heavy heart that I see Pamela leaving. And it's with heavy heart that Jeannie's going to be leaving down the road, because both of you have been key components of moving this along. And gosh, I guess we're not going to stop with those monthly meetings, though, are we? In fact, I think somebody's stepping the pace up, which is just the example that we just got over the threshold. Now we're in the house, and now we got to get busy. So if you think we've been busy in the past, I think, David, you spoke to it. It's going to get even busier. So thank you all very much. And there is no further business, as I understand, for this board to do. So we are now adjourned.